Right, and welcome to MLS Law Show. My name is David Helm. I am a licensed practicing attorney in the state of Michigan, and today will be day 4 of the Ethan Crumley Miller hearing. Hopefully, the last day. I can't imagine this goes beyond today. We'll see, because we had a number of experts, including the egg dropping ones, and all the shenanigans that came with that. But that I'm trying to remember now. It's been so long. It's been 2 weeks since day 3, and I think the state finished cross-examining that doctor. I don't believe the state has any rebuttal witnesses. I think the defense might have one more witness. I'm trying to remember back. It's been so long. But anyways, it should be a short day today. And then they'll give their oral arguments, and we will go from there. Breaking news, what? Something about the Crumblies? Anyways, trying to find a court feed. Again, another reason why I want my own cameras in the courtroom, because I can't find a feed of this right now, which is really annoying. But we'll get a feed and we'll get going. Hello, 1163562. That's such a beautiful name. Welcome to the chat. Welcome, welcome. We got KT. I see Jamie is here. Awesome. Jamie, you want a link? If you're not doing anything, I'll send you a link. You can come on in. Christine, welcome. We got Ian Theus and Salvador's here, and of course Brandon is here. But Brandon, remember, I drank my last beer yesterday, so just keep that in mind. But I am welcoming the super chats, Brandon, so I can get my own cameras in the courtroom and make this thing a lot smoother. For those of you who did not pay attention or did not stream, and I don't know why you wouldn't, my prior Miller hearing cases on or streams on Ethan, let me explain. In 2012, the Supreme Court of the United States said it is cruel and unusual to sentence a juvenile to life without the possibility of parole. That's what they said. Now, they did carve out some very narrow exceptions, and the state of Michigan, as well as other states, but through legislation and various case laws, have said there are very, very, very narrow exceptions, and those essentially are the unredeemable. And so the purpose of this hearing is the state must prove by clear and convincing evidence that Ethan Crumbley is irredeemable, that there's nothing that could essentially constitute the justification of allowing this child to go up for parole at some point in his future. It's not that he's going to get out, it's just that he might have the option. So that's the purpose of the Miller hearing. It's not a sentencing hearing, it's not a trial, there's no jury. It's only the judge deciding whether or not, before sentencing, at some point, Ethan Crumbley is going to have the possibility of parole. Now, I'm in favor of let's default to the possibility of parole. Let's allow people to have at least that window open. My thoughts on this come from a few different places. One, if somebody has the hope that they might get out, they might be better behaved inside as opposed to someone who has no hope, right? That's sort of kind of my general thinking. But also, for everything that he did, he is a juvenile. He was 15 at the time. He's 17 now. So, assuming he's in jail for 50 years, he'll be 65. Assuming he's in jail for 60 years, he'll be 75. Are you telling me that this individual, if he's a model prisoner for 70 years, 60 years, shouldn't be able to get out at some point? That he's totally irredeemable? I think there's a possibility that he could be reformed after that long, right? So I just want to keep the door open. Oh, good morning, Mother. Welcome to the chat. Burdens of proof. Welcome, welcome. Proof of life. Valhalla is alive. Valhalla is alive. He's don't you already have cameras? I have one camera I need at least one more, but I also need the computer and the Wi-Fi little hookup thing. So that's what I need. So I still need to get that. I mean, I have the camera, but I don't have the other equipment that I need. It's not the purpose of the Miller hearing. Of my Miller hearings. Oh, ha, ha, ha. Yes. Thank you, Brandon, for the $4.99 super chat. If I read it correctly, I would get the joke the first time. It's early. It is early. It is early. All right. Let me try to find a feed here. We might have to go to generic court feed rather than the television cameras in the courtroom, but they're supposed to have it. Oh, here we go. Now we've got it. Finally. They like to keep us waiting. So let's
All rise. The Oakland County Circuit Court is now in session with the Honorable Kwame Rowe presiding.
This is Fox 2 News. We'll take their feed. Brandon with a $4.99 super chat says, "Hi, Mrs. Helm. Val wants to finish drinking on stream. Are you okay with day drinking?" I don't think Val can. He was a trooper though yesterday.
Ethan Crumley, case number 2022-279-506-FC.
Thank you. Good morning, Council. Appearance for the record.
Good morning, Your Honor. Karen McDonald on behalf of the people of the state of Michigan.
Thank you, Mark Keys, on behalf of the people.
Good morning, Your Honor. David Williams on behalf of the people.
Good morning, Your Honor. Paulette Michelle Lofton on behalf of Ethan Crumley.
Good morning, Your Honor. Amy Kopp on behalf of Ethan Crumley.
Good morning, Your Honor. Deborah H. McKelvey on behalf of Ethan Crumley.
Thank you, and good morning to everyone. You may all be seated. Today's a time set for our continuation of the Miller hearing in this case. When we were last here, the defense had rested and the people intended on calling.
Okay, the defense did rest.
With that,
Hopefully it's a short rebuttal.
before we continue with the Miller hearing.
I don't believe so.
No, Judge.
You guys hear everything okay?
You may call your rebuttal witness.
Thank you. People call Dr. Lisa Anaker.
I feel like I'm only hearing out of one ear.
Doctor, you're going to approach the witness stand. You're going to stand in the witness box. Face my clerk to be sworn, please.
She looks too young to be a doctor. I want the old man with the egg.
Perjury. Do you swear or affirm that the statement you're about to make to this court will be the whole truth?
I do.
Your name, if you could, please state your full name for the record and spell your last name.
Please identify which defense attorney.
Lisa Anaker. My last name is spelled Anacker.
Thank you. People, your witness.
Thank you, Judge. Good morning.
Good morning.
How are you employed?
I'm a staff psychiatrist and consulting forensic examiner employed at the Center for Forensic Psychiatry.
Thank you, Doctor. And could you please briefly describe your educational and professional background?
Yes. I completed 4 years of college, 4 years of medical school, followed by 4 years of psychiatry
Anyone get her name?
training through the University of Michigan's Department of Psychiatry. Following that, I completed an additional year of subspecialty training in the field of forensic psychiatry.
So you're a medical doctor, is that correct?
Yes, I'm a medical doctor.
Thank you. Now, could you please describe some of your postdoctoral training as well?
Yes. After medical school, as I mentioned, I completed 4 years of training in psychiatry residency at the University of Michigan. Psychiatry residency consists of a variety of clinical rotations to gain additional expertise in a variety of areas. These can include things like neurology, inpatient and outpatient psychiatry, addiction medicine, child psychiatry, geriatric psychiatry, psychotherapy, among many others.
Thank you, Doctor. Are you a member of any professional organizations?
I am, among others, I'm a member of the American Academy of Psychiatry and the Law, which is the professional organization related to forensic psychiatry.
Are you board certified in forensic psychiatry?
I am.
Can you please tell us what that means and why it's important?
Forensic psychiatry is the subspecialty of psychiatry that's particularly at the intersection of medicine and the law. So forensic psychiatrists.
Well, that's
are
not a
medical
rehearsed
doctors,
statement.
Particularly psychiatrists who've undergone an additional year of training to gain further clinical expertise in areas like civil and criminal competencies, criminal responsibility evaluations, violence risk assessments, and others.
Okay. And do you teach as well?
I do. In addition to my role at the Center for Forensic Psychiatry, I'm also an adjunct faculty member at the University of Michigan's Department of Psychiatry, And in that role, I teach medical students, residents, and fellows in topics related to forensic psychiatry.
Okay. Now, as a medical doctor, do you have a license to prescribe medication to the Drug Enforcement Administration?
I do.
What does that mean?
It means as a medical doctor with that license, I can prescribe medications to patients in clinical settings.
Now, tell us, please, doctor, if you could, what does a staff psychiatrist and consulting forensic examiner at the Forensic Center do?
As a staff psychiatrist, I've treated patients at the center, which is a state hospital in Michigan. Patients who are admitted to the center are typically those who have been found not guilty by reason of insanity or incompetent to stand trial. Many of the patients at the center have serious mental illness, so treatment can involve medications and therapy. As a consulting forensic examiner, I conduct court-ordered forensic evaluations, most likely in competency to stand trial and criminal responsibility.
Okay, and how many of those forensic examinations have you conducted to date?
I've conducted 525 evaluations in the last 5 years.
Thank you, doctor. Could you please tell us the process when you undergo when you complete a forensic examination on a subject?
Yes.
Thank you.
When we complete forensic evaluations, it typically starts with a review of the data that's sent to us, which typically involves a court order, which is simply the document that outlines what evaluation the judge wants us to do, and also the review of the police report that accompanies the charges. I then typically consult with the defense attorney to hear their concerns and reasons for the referral, and then I interview the defendant. Following that, I decide whether or not further data is needed. That further data can include things like psych testing.
Good morning,
by a
Erin.
specific question, or it can involve things like asking for body camera videos, asking for records from hospitals or other medical providers, or asking for records from jails or prisons where the defendant has been located.
Good
So
morning,
if I'm
Moni.
following you, it's your objective to gather as much information as possible when undergoing this exercise.
Absolutely. The more data, the better in forensic evaluations.
Doctor, have you also studied studied mental illness and the effects of mental illness more?
I will have to say that within the first couple of minutes, this woman seems way more credible than the defense's last witness. The defense's first witness was fine, the expert witness, but the last one was a train wreck from the first word. And that's what the judge is taking everything into consideration. This is not a jury trial, so we have to understand that too. But this witness just sounds way more credible.
I have.
Specifically, have you studied the intersection of mental illness and violence?
Yes, I've co-authored papers on mental illness and gun violence, among other papers.
You've been qualified as an expert in the field of forensic psychiatry.
Well, I would say stick with us for now, and you're probably going to have a lot of questions in which you should. If you're really interested in the Crumbley case, both Ethan and his parents, you should watch all of it, because there's a lot of information you're not going to get from today's stream. Oh, see, now I done and messed it up.
Psychiatry in the past.
I have. I've been qualified approximately 50 times in various counties in the state of Michigan.
May I approach the minister?
Yes.
This is People Proposed 66. Doctor, can you please tell the court what I just stated?
Thank you, Brandon,
This
for
is
the
a copy
$49
of my
super chat.
CV.
Is that your most up-to-date CV?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm
Judge, at
branding
this
my
point, the
new
people will
equipment
move
with your
to
name
omit
on it.
66, as well as move to qualify this witness as an expert in the field of forensic psychiatry.
Any objection to either?
No objection.
Thank you. With that, People 66 is admitted into evidence. This witness will be reflected as a witness as an expert in the area of forensic psychiatry.
Thank you, Judge.
You're very welcome. You may continue.
Thank you. Doctor, do you always author a report after conducting a forensic examination?
I do.
Okay. And when you write that report, do you document the materials you reviewed in coming to your conclusions?
I do.
Okay. Would that be the best practices in the field?
I would say so, yes.
Why is that?
It's important when the readers of our report, which are typically attorneys and judges, that they know where our opinion came from and what we relied upon to come to our opinion. It's also important when we're testifying to know and be able to reference when we're speaking about our opinion.
Doctor, are you familiar with the defendant in this case?
I am.
Did you evaluate him in your capacity as a consulting forensic examiner for the Forensic Center?
I did.
And when was that?
I evaluated him on March 15th, 2022.
And what was the purpose for that?
I saw him at that time for an evaluation relative to his criminal responsibility.
Okay. Did you prepare a report?
I did.
May I approach the witness, Judge?
Yes. This has been admitted as People 64. Doctor, do you recognize that?
I do.
And what is that?
This is my report regarding his criminal responsibility dated March 29, 2022.
Okay, and you authored that report?
I did.
This is the Defense Exhibit N, as in Nancy. This is a report authored by Dr. Colin King from June of 2023. Have you seen that before?
I have, yes.
Doctor, I would like you just to have all three of those exhibits next to you, and if you need to refer to them for any reason, just please let the court know.
Thank you.
Now, the purpose for the evaluation that you conducted and Dr. Colin King conducted were different. Is that correct?
That's correct.
But they did, in fact, address many of the same issues. Would that be right?
That's correct.
She does.
Now, in
drink
your
a lot.
report, it appears that the sources of information that you relied upon span the first 6 pages of Exhibit 64. Is that right?
That's right.
Now, Doctor, were you able to listen to Dr.
He's gonna
King's
use bacon.
testimony on August the 1st of this year?
I was.
So, correct me if I'm wrong, but according to your report and Dr. King's testimony, it appears that you reviewed all of the information that Dr. King reviewed, aside from some self-reporting that the defendant made to Dr. King. Is that right?
That's my understanding, yes.
Now, I want to address a few points from Dr. King's testimony in his report and ask you if you agree or disagree. So, first, Dr. King testified that the defendant is, without question, someone who is mentally ill. Do you recall that testimony?
I do.
And that was, in fact, in his report. Is that true?
That's true.
And in Dr. King's report, he was referencing the Michigan statute defining mental illness. Is that right?
That's right.
Okay. Do you agree that this defendant meets the statutory definition for someone who is mentally ill?
I don't.
Could you please explain that?
Hello, hello.
Yes. I want to start by saying that the common conception of mental illness, for example, if someone has anxiety or depression, that's different than mental illness that is defined by Michigan statute. My understanding of Michigan's definition of mental illness is that it is a substantial disorder of thought or mood that significantly impairs someone's judgment, behavior, capacity to recognize reality, or ability to cope with the ordinary demands of life. So in my earlier example, someone who has anxiety or depression and that sees a therapist might not meet criteria for a statutorily defined mental illness because it doesn't rise to that threshold of a substantial disorder of thought or mood. Now, the statute doesn't specify which disorder automatically meets criteria, but the notion of a substantial disorder of thought or mood is thought to apply most readily to something like psychosis, which is a gross impairment in recognizing reality, or to something like a major mood episode, like a manic episode or a profound mood episode. So in this particular case, I took all of the data that I have available to me, including the defendant's report to me during our multi-hour interview, as well as all the information that I listed, to come to a conclusion that he did not meet criteria for a substantial disorder of thought or mood, specifically at the time of the shooting.
So, doctor, somebody could actually be experiencing internal crisis or symptoms of depression and still not meet the definition of mental illness and certainly not be psychotic. Is that right?
Correct.
Doctor, you were in court when the defense played the videos of the defendant in the Oakland County Jail. That was Defense Exhibit S, as in Susan. First of all, did you know that incident, those videos were depicted from one incident in particular?
I was told that, yes.
Okay, and that was from May the 26th of 2023, which would have been about a year and a half after the defendant had been locked in the Oakland County Jail after the murders. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay. Dr. King testified that those videos were evidence that the defendant was in throes of psychosis. What do you make of those videos?
So those videos were taken from an incident in May of 2023 of this year. So those videos tell us about the defendant's mental state during that one incident in May of this year. It tells us nothing about what the defendant's mental state was like in November of 2021 when the shooting occurred.
I misunderstood them because I thought the video of Ethan in the chair and kind of going crazy was from right after the shooting, but apparently it was May of this year or March of this year, May of this year. That's interesting.
Now, whether the defendant has developed depression or an adjustment disorder, like the jail psychiatrist testified, in the year and a half that he's been in jail in a cell by himself, it's possible. But I do think it's important to note that the jail psychiatrist who has been seeing the defendant during her testimony still noted that the defendant was not psychotic and did not treat him for a psychotic disorder, even after those videos occurred in May of 2023.
So May of 2023. So Dr. King, who testified with all the eggs and everything, said that he was suffering from a disorder of some sort, but didn't really do a whole lot. He just kind of looked at everyone else's notes and then spoke with Ethan a few times to make that conclusion. But like she just said, like the witness just said, the treating psychiatrist at the hospital or at the facility didn't indicate anything. I think the defense is going with that because mental health illness is treatable, right? The idea with this hearing is to determine whether or not Ethan can be reformed in some way and should be entitled to parole at some point in the future and be a contributing member of society. So if the idea is that he suffers from a mental health illness that is treatable, then he's more likely to be cured, I guess, or at least made into a productive member of society. So I think that's what they're pushing for.
And Doctor, you're referring to Dr. Kadar, who testified in, I think, July the 28th.
Yeah, that's how I understood it as well. So good. I'm glad I'm not the
and
only
of course,
one.
you were in court for that testimony?
Correct.
And you reviewed her records as well?
I did.
Now, specifically, Dr. King testified that he diagnosed the defendant with major depressive disorder,
No idea.
severe with psychotic features. Do you agree with that diagnosis?
I don't.
Tell us why.
There are several reasons. I want to start by saying that when we try to diagnose someone in a forensic assessment, or when we're trying to decide whether someone meets criteria for that statutory definition of mental illness, we like to rely on multiple sources of data. Now, there's subjective data, and then there's also objective data. And an example of a subjective piece of data would be the defendant's self-report. It is an important piece of data that we consider, but it is subjective. It's their own experience of what they were going through. Now, an example that might help people understand is if you go to your doctor and you walk in and you say, I have pneumonia, you would expect that that doctor would do more than just take your word for it. You would expect that they would use their clinical judgment and their expertise to determine whether what you're saying actually meets the clinical diagnosis that you think you have. And it's the same way with mental illness.
I was going to comment.
If someone
but
says they
valid.
have hallucinations, we need to do more than just take that at face value. We need to use our expertise as well as all the other data that we have in a case to determine whether that's true.
So, Doctor, if I could interject, that doesn't mean that he didn't tell his friend or that he didn't tell his parents. It just means as a clinician, you'd want to do further investigation before you give an actual diagnosis.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. And so my understanding of Dr. King's diagnoses was that he relied on the defendant's self-report
It
and
was
what he self-reported
very
in
disturbing.
text messages, for example, as well as on a variety of psychological tests that he conducted, the majority of which were self-report checklists to come to that conclusion. Now, when I decided whether or not he had a statutorily defined mental illness, I took into account what the defendant told me and those text messages that were referenced, but I also looked at the more objective data that we have in this case, and there's actually quite a lot. So, for example, objective data would be something like the videos of the defendant immediately after the shooting, during the shooting, in the police substation. And in those videos, there's no evidence that the defendant was objectively exhibiting signs of psychosis during that time. So what we see in those videos is that the defendant was communicating clearly, he was calm and collected, he was answering questions relevantly, suggesting reality-oriented thought processing. What we don't see is any signs of bizarre behavior, disorganized speech, responding to internal stimuli.
Could I ask you just right there, what is internal stimuli?
When someone's actively hallucinating, the clinical term that we sometimes use is responding to internal stimuli. So imagine that you're hearing a voice or seeing something that other people can't see or hear. That would be distracting. You might be looking around trying to figure out where the voice is coming from. You might be talking under your breath, responding to this voice. You might be looking around, seeing something that other people can't. In none of these videos does the defendant appear to be doing that. Now, that would be incredibly atypical to present with none of those signs that I mentioned if someone was in the midst of an acute psychotic episode. In addition to the videos, though, there's also other more objective data that I also considered, and that included all of the jail records where the defendant was monitored quite consistently in the hours, days, weeks, months after this offense. And in none of those records does any clinician ever describe him as appearing psychotic, despite some occasional self-reports of hallucinations of hearing his name.
So, just to comment on this, that's essentially what the warden of the facility testified, I think on day 2, and he talked about all the programs and all this stuff that they offer, and that particularly when people have the opportunity, they usually do better they become active and involved in the programs that are available to them. And yeah, essentially, if they can't reform them, then they kind of fail. That's exactly what he said. Now, America doesn't really have a traditional view of reforming prisoners. They have an idea of punishing prisoners, so they kind of have to overcome that mindset.
And so, again, that would be quite atypical for someone.
Thank you,
who was
Brandon, for the
acutely
$4.99 super
psychotic
chat. The next one.
to then show no signs of psychosis immediately after the shooting and no signs of psychosis in the days, weeks, and months after the shooting, despite not being treated with an antipsychotic medication.
And Doctor, can I stop you again? Now, Dr. King testified that psychosis can wax and wane. I believe that was his phrase, wax and wane. Now, tell us about that, please.
While it is true that symptoms of mental illness can appear more severe at some times and be in remission at other times, it would be incredibly atypical for someone who was acutely psychotic to then show no signs of psychosis both during the shooting,
not yet, Brandon,
immediately after
this
the
afternoon,
shooting, and then for months after in jail without treatment. Again, if someone was treated with an antipsychotic, maybe they don't show symptoms. But the defendant has never been treated with an antipsychotic medication, and he's never been diagnosed with psychosis because no jail clinician ever observed him objectively psychotic.
In fact, doctor, did you actually ask him about if he was hearing voices to help in your determination if he was in an acute state of psychosis during the shooting?
I did. So in addition to all that objective data,
Day
I
4.
asked the defendant if he was hallucinating at the time of the shooting, and he told me he was not. He told me he wasn't hallucinating during the shooting. He told me he wasn't hallucinating in the days prior to the shooting. And I specifically asked him if he was experiencing what's called command hallucinations, which are voices commanding you to do something like harm someone else. And he specifically denied those as well. He also didn't attribute any of his behavior to delusions, and he didn't attribute any of his behavior to psychosis, even subjectively.
So, doctor, that covers the psychosis aspect of the diagnosis. What about the major depressive diagnosis? Tell us about that.
Yes. So, while it's clear that the defendant had signs of low mood and anxiety and loneliness, going back to even spring of 2021, that's apparent in the text messages. To be diagnosed with a major depressive disorder, it requires a degree of functional impairment that I don't believe the evidence suggests that he had. So, for example, even when you look from the spring of 2021 onward, when you look at what the defendant was actually doing in those months after he started reporting low mood, he was working several days a week. He was hanging out with his friend on a regular basis. He was doing things that brought him pleasure, like hobbies of coin collecting and model rocketry. Even as it gets closer.
Wait a minute. Model rocketry? That's how she says that. He engaged in the hobby of model rocketry. I don't know. That's just a weird way to say it for me. I'm sorry. I just picked up on that.
To the shooting, it would not be unexpected that when a person would suddenly lose contact with a cherished friend, that that person would be more upset and more sad. That, of course, would be an expected reaction. But even in that month, after he loses contact with his friend, he's still doing things that brought him pleasure. He told me that he brought a bird head into school approximately 10 days before the shooting.
By the way, Moni, so if you missed day 3, okay, so if you missed day 3, and I didn't mean to cut off when she's talking about the bird head that he brought into school. We'll get back to that. But if you missed day 3, you missed Dr. King, who is so brilliant that he brought an egg into court and dropped it into a bowl to simulate a closed head injury. Yes, he did that. Day 3 was all kinds of a mess. But yes, Ethan brought a bird head into school. That's what she was just mentioning.
Because that brought him a feeling of pleasure and power. He told me he went to the shooting range with his mom, which he described as fun. When you look at the totality of the data, well, I don't contest that he had low mood. I don't think that he met the level of functional impairment that's necessary for a major depressive disorder diagnosis.
And again, doctor, we're not talking about someone who is quote unquote depressed or experiencing crisis. We're talking about the statutory definition to meet major depressive disorder and being psychotic.
Yeah, the egg drop.
Correct. And again, there are different things. It can be difficult to understand. Someone can have anxiety and depression and not meet criteria for a statutorily defined mental illness.
In fact, doctor, in your report, Exhibit 64, you spent considerable time explaining your analysis. That'd be pages 59 to 64. Is that right?
That's right.
Well, cats are psycho,
Do you have a copy?
and they would eat you if they were
It
bigger.
should be in that binder.
Know that.
If not,
Anyone
I
who
have
has a
this
cat.
copy. Exhibit 64, Judge. I have one right here.
Thank you. My binder goes up to 61, but there's nothing behind
May I
it.
approach?
Yes.
Defense counsel was going to say yes, absolutely, because I could get him out of the control of his dangerous parents.
Thank you. You may continue.
Thank you, Judge.
I will say, for anyone who's new and hasn't watched any of my streams yet, or the Crumbly streams anyways, I am very interested. The whole reason I'm on YouTube is for the parents of Ethan Crumbly, their case, which I find fascinating. And I'm focusing on this, not so much for Ethan, but for what they might bring against the parents in the coming few months. What's interesting is the state is taking the position that it's Ethan, nothing to do with the parents, and the defense is saying the parents. The state, the very same prosecutors, the very same individuals are going to be making the opposite argument in just a few months. So I find this fascinating.
Doctor, in support of his conclusion, Dr. King described some of the defendant's writings as signs of his mental illness and psychosis. He
Hey,
specifically referred to the math assignment from November the 30th, 2021, the morning of the shooting. Can you please tell us your opinion on the writings referred to by Dr. King?
Yes. So instead of an example of a major mood disorder or a cry for help, in my opinion, those writings on the school assignments are best an example of what we call leakage. And leakage in the threat assessment literature is warning behavior that occurs when an individual reveals clues as to their thoughts, their feelings, their fantasies, or their objectives in a way that signals an impending violent act.
As long as she's using this in the retrospective factor. Leakage was an argument that was made in the parents' case, saying that there's a pathway to violence and the parents should have been able to predict it, which is nonsense. The court actually threw that out. She's talking about leakage here, I hope, in the retrospective phase, meaning we can get an idea of what he was thinking now based off of what he was leaking out, as opposed to trying to predict the future.
Leakage can be unintentional, but it can also be quite intentional. And the motivations for leakage.
John, do you have leakage?
Anxiety about the upcoming act, or it can include a desire for notoriety or fame for after the act. And in this particular case, I think that there is data to suggest that the defendant wanted that notoriety. He wanted to be remembered for the shooting, and he wanted to be memorialized for his actions. So in my opinion, those writings on the paper were, again, less an example of a cry for help or a major mood disorder and more an indicative sign of leakage.
Where's
Doctor, is it
Salvador?
significant to
I need a
you that on
definition.
November the 30th, 2021, at 9:14 a.m., he was taken from his classroom to a counselor's office, and he sat there until 10:52 a.m. when he could have disclosed his plan?
Correct. He had multiple opportunities to receive help and chose not to.
Doctor, is it problematic to form an opinion or diagnosis primarily on a self-report?
It can be, especially when there's other data available, because people can say things for all sorts of reasons. They can be truthful, of course. They could be exaggerating or lying for some sort of secondary gain, or they could simply be misusing a clinical term. So, for example, we may have all heard people say things like, I was really psychotic yesterday, or I was so manic this morning, or she's schizophrenic. Those are clinical terms that are being misused so that someone can describe their experience. But no clinician would hear that and automatically say, yes, that means you're psychotic. So again, we have to take more than a person's self-report, especially in a case where there's such ample collateral data that is more objective.
Now, Doctor, in Dr. King's report, he indicated that he referred to one day of text messages. That's from April the 5th, 2021, between the defendant and the defendant's friend. You reviewed the entire text thread. Would that be right?
I did.
Okay. And of course, some of those text messages were quite concerning to you.
Absolutely.
So when you're conducting a forensic examination and you uncover evidence such as this that does cause concern, what do you do with it?
I follow up with the defendant and ask specifically what their thoughts and intentions were when they wrote those things.
Okay. And do you?
Of course, I was muted. I just saw Nathan's post. Yeah, I want to apologize for anyone who tried to get in screening in Discord last night and were limited out. We increased it, but apparently we couldn't do it live in the moment. We had to log in and log out. So we're going to do a replay of the Johnny Depp documentary stream at some point this weekend for anyone who wasn't able to watch it with us yesterday. And we should be able to have more than 25 people in there. So hopefully you can join us for the next one if you missed out on it.
You attempt to, like in the case of text messages, for example, find the appropriate context for those?
Yes, the context is always very important.
What did you do in this case regarding the text messages?
So the text messages that you're referencing in the spring of 2021, I believe, are the ones where he talks to his friend about hallucinations. And I think it's very important to put those in context. So many of those text messages, when you look just beyond the word hallucination, they're being sent late at night when the defendant is alone in his home and when he's watching horror movies. Now, the defendant told me that he believed that his house was haunted ever since he moved in when he was in the 4th grade. And belief in the supernatural is relatively culturally normative in our society.
I'm sorry. I have a tendency to turn on lights in the hallway on my way down to the bedroom after watching a scary movie now at my age. It just is something you do.
And doesn't mean that someone is psychotic.
Yay, I'm not
and it wouldn't
psychotic.
be unexpected that someone who believed in the supernatural would have that fear heightened when they're alone in a home late at night and they're hearing noises and they're watching a horror movie. So to me, that doesn't mean that someone is psychotic. It means that they, again, are alone in a home watching horror movies and having that fear heightened. There's other context in Dr. King's report. He lists the text messages where the defendant tells his friend about hallucinating in a Spanish class. And if you keep reading, the defendant tells his friend, a girl in my Spanish class saw the hallucination as well. That's not how hallucinations work. We don't share hallucinations. Two people usually don't see the same hallucination. When you put it in context, you would see it's not clinically lining up with what a true hallucination is. He and his friend also go on to say that they both hallucinate at work. So again, while I don't doubt the defendant was trying to express things that he was experiencing, that word hallucinations and concluding that he was psychotic based on that, it doesn't fit the context and it doesn't fit the clinical diagnosis of psychosis.
If I am James and Jennifer Crumbly's defense counsel, I am watching this witness very closely and I am hiring her as the expert in that case. Because what she is saying is exactly what I was thinking when they kept going over his text messages to his parents. One of the fundamental things that the state is pushing against the parents is that, look at these text messages. He's obviously crazy, and yet they gave him access to a gun. They bought a gun for him as a hobby, right? And you don't do that if your son is experiencing these hallucinations. This is the witness you want for the defense in the James and Jennifer Kremley case. And welcome, Jeremy, the witch, to a new member. Thank you very much. I don't think you're a returning member. I think you're new. But if you are a returning member, awesome. Thank you. Otherwise, check the membership tab with a link to my Discord, where we have all of the member content. We have more stuff on this case and other cases that we cover, as well as we do some watch streams and things like that. Like we just did Johnny Depp documentary last night. We're going to do it again for people who couldn't get into the first one. But welcome.
Thank you, Doctor. Now, Dr. King also testified that thoughts of suicide are a symptom of psychosis. Do you agree with that statement?
I don't.
And tell me why, please.
It's just not medically correct. Suicidal ideation may seem illogical to many people, but it is different than psychosis. And equating the two and saying that they're the same is not correct.
Okay. Now, I want to go back to something you said earlier about objective evidence and how you rely upon it in forming a conclusion. So you reviewed all of the evidence in this case. Would that be right?
Correct.
Okay. So that includes surveillance video of the shooting from November the 30th, as well as the in-car video when the defendant was arrested.
Correct.
And the video of the defendant being inside the Oakland County Jail after he was arrested.
Correct.
Okay. Those are in evidence, and you've seen them.
Yes.
Okay. Now, so we're clear, this is the sort of objective evidence that you were referring to.
Correct. Those would be examples of more objective evidence.
Okay. Now, specific to the in-car video, the shooting video, and the interview room video, tell us what was significant to you when you watched them.
When we're watching a video and trying to determine a defendant's mental state at the time that the video occurred, we're looking for things that are there and things that aren't there. So what's there in the videos is the defendant calm, collected, communicating clearly with police and with his parents.
This witness is productive for the prosecution in this case, but counterproductive for the case against the parents. Everything that the state has put up in this case is counterproductive for their own arguments against the parents. And that's why I find this so fascinating. That the exact same, the prosecutor right now asking the questions is second chair on the parents' case, and the elected prosecutor who's heading up the parents' case is also in the courtroom right now. And that's why I just find it so fascinating. They're going to be arguing out of both sides of their mouth between the parents and Ethan.
He is answering questions relevantly. He is following commands. What isn't there are any signs of psychosis, any signs of bizarre behavior, any speech disorganization, and again, no responding to internal stimuli. And like I mentioned before, this would be quite atypical for someone who was acutely psychotic to have then turned it off and have no signs or symptoms of it, either in those videos or again, subsequently in jail.
Okay. And Doctor, specifically the shooting video of November the 30th, you observed the defendant to aim his firearm at individuals, to pick his targets, choose who to shoot and not to shoot. Would that be right?
Correct.
Now, Dr. King also relied upon the video the defendant filmed of himself the night before the shooting when determining that the defendant was psychotic. We're opining that he was psychotic. Were you able to put that video in appropriate context as well?
Yes. So the video that was referenced was audio of the defendant speaking the night before the shooting. And I believe what was specifically talked about was concerns that he talked about a demon or about demons. Now, I asked the defendant about that very specifically, and he told me that in no way was he trying to say that he was a demon or referencing a demon. It was a reference to the person he described as his idol, which was the Parkland school shooter. And the Parkland school shooter, he told me, referenced demons during his arrest. So when you put that comment in context, there's no signs that that was psychotic. That was a logical reference to the person that he said was his idol.
So he was in effect parroting his idol at that point.
It was a call out to his idol, yes.
And Judge, for the record, those are exhibits 56 and 57 that we refer to.
Thank you.
Okay, Doctor. Dr. King spent some time on his method of diagnosis. He tested.
I don't think the judge is going to make the call from the bench today after closing arguments. I think he's going to take some time, but it shouldn't take him too much time. He's had 3 weeks in between to at least get the preliminary stuff together.
There are 4 ways to study the brain and diagnose and treat mental illness. Did you hear that?
I did.
Okay. So he first said that his quote was, mental health people should look directly at the brain through various brain imaging techniques.
Yes.
He then said the second way is to test the brain directly through psychological instruments.
That's what he said. Yes.
He testified that the third way is to use symptom clusters.
Yes.
And the fourth way is to guess. Do you recall that?
I recall that. Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so everyone has to give a thumbs up and a like. We need to get to 100 here very shortly. Otherwise, Valhalla's going to get hit with a bunch of cash, and he's going to have to own up to it. So to save Valhalla, you guys got to get at least 100 likes.
So first, doctor, I'd like to ask you, as an expert in forensic psychiatry, qualified 50 times over, do you utilize brain imaging techniques to come to a diagnosis?
Not typically, no.
Tell me why.
There is no brain scan that can definitively diagnose mental illness. If there was, we would use it on everyone who has symptoms, but the research just isn't there yet. In addition, the times that we do use brain imaging would be for a very specific concern that maybe that there was a medical problem underlying the symptoms. For example, someone's very elderly and they're exhibiting symptoms of psychosis for the first time. We might be concerned that they have a brain tumor or something that might mimic psychiatric illness in that age. So those are the situations where we're most likely going to get brain imaging, and otherwise it's just not typically used to diagnose mental illness.
Thank you. What about psychological testing?
Psychological testing definitely has important uses, but they're typically to answer a particular question. For example, if I had concern that someone is lingering or feigning symptoms, I might want to do psychological testing. The important thing about psychological testing, though, is that it's a relatively here and now evaluation. So it's going to tell me the defendant's mental state at the time that the test is given. And for criminal responsibility.
Oh, thank you for noticing it. Rabbit gifted 5 memberships. Thank you very much. We have, let's see here. Valhalla awaits. You can't chug a beer, you coward. Really? Was gifted a membership. We have Bailey Mack or MC, and I'm horrible with names, so just go with it. Mrs. Smith, Tia Marie, sorry. Heather Sparrow. Oh, Heather, hello. And did I get everybody? Anyways, yeah, that's everyone. That's the 5. Thank you very much for the gifted memberships, Rabbit. Oh, see, now I did it.
Which is what I was evaluating the defendant for, that's an evaluation of the defendant's mental state at the time of the shooting. So a test 6 months later, a year later, a year and a half later is going to be less useful to me than all of the objective data depicting the defendant at the time of the shooting.
Now, you mentioned it. Can you elaborate on the specific test that the defendant, that Dr. King utilized to evaluate?
I will.
Yes.
That would be amazing if
Dr.
you asked
King
about the egg.
Spoke about a variety of tests that he gave the defendant. And with some exception, of course, the majority of those tests were self-report checklists or questionnaires, meaning the defendant, checked boxes or endorsed various symptoms for how he was feeling at the time that the test was given. Now, those can be useful, but it's important to know that most of those tests don't have validity indicators. And what that means is that without validity indicators, we don't know if the defendant was over-reporting symptoms, under-reporting symptoms, or even responding relevantly to the test.
I apologize. I missed Aaron's 10 gifted memberships. That is awesome. And then we got another 5 gifted memberships from Jess Rubery, gifted 5 memberships. Rose Ann, let's see here. No Way, Parabellum, Sandra, and Hotel Chicken all got gifted memberships. I'm sorry, Aaron, I wasn't able to pull up the gifted memberships or the people who received your gifted memberships, but thank you very much for all of that. You guys are awesome. And if you are a new member, there's a membership tab on my YouTube channel, which takes you to my Discord, which is where I have all my member content And again, we're going to be streaming the Johnny Depp documentary, and then other things related to the cases that I cover are also in there. There's a bunch of channels laid out. It's fairly easy to navigate, but if you have any trouble, ask for Jung Min. She'll be able to help you, Jamie or myself. We can all help you out in there.
So for example, I could give you a self-report questionnaire and you could check every single box and we could say, wow, the results are that you have the worst case of whatever it is. But we wouldn't know without validity indicators that that was a legitimate response. In addition, 2 of the tests that were given were not normed on juveniles less than the age of 18, so the results may not be valid. One of the tests even had very specifically a checklist for children, and the adult version was used. So again, whether those results are valid is in question. But regardless, I think the takeaway is that with some exceptions, the majority were, again, self-report questionnaires.
Before you move on, you mentioned 2 of the tests. Do you know specifically which 2 tests?
Yes. So the brief psychiatric rating scale is the one that has a child for a juvenile version.
Hello, Bree.
And then the evaluation of competency to stand trial revised is typically normed on adults over the age of 18.
Now, doctor, what do you do when you make a diagnosis?
Thank you, Jess.
So to make a psychiatric diagnosis in a forensic assessment or elsewhere, we rely on our diagnostic manual and our clinical judgment and the data that we have in every case. So again, the more pieces of data, the better. But it's not typically done through brain imaging. And while psychological testing can be useful for criminal responsibility evaluations, we're really looking at what the defendant's telling us. Does it match with the records? Does it match with any video or audio that we have? And then using our clinical judgment to see if it matches with our diagnostic manual.
Do you guess?
No, I do not guess, and nor does any forensic evaluator that I know guess when doing forensic evaluations.
Now, doctor, I want to move on to some other testimony from Dr. King. He indicated and he stated that he had concerns that the defendant suffered a brain injury. Did you hear that testimony?
I did, yes.
Okay. Now, I'm not going to ask you to crack an egg, but can you please tell us what a traumatic brain injury is?
Yes. A traumatic brain injury, or TBI, as it's
That's
often
awesome.
abbreviated, is a injury to the brain that occurs when there's a blow to the head of some kind. And there usually are recognizable signs or symptoms that occur in the hours, days, months after such an injury.
Okay. So
We need
is it fair to
25
say
more
that
likes in
you
the
don't
next 8
suffer a
minutes.
brain injury every time you hit your head?
No, not every head injury is a TBI. People can obviously hit their head and not have signs or symptoms of a TBI.
Okay. So what are those signs and symptoms?
So signs of a TBI that you might want to look for in the early hours, especially, would be things like headache, nausea, vomiting, vision, hearing changes, dizziness, balance problems, confusion, memory problems. There are many.
So you reviewed that same video clip that the defense played of the defendant in 2020 at a restaurant, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So first of all, how would you actually diagnose somebody with a brain injury or traumatic brain injury?
So if you're diagnosing someone with a TBI, it can involve brain imaging, but also the majority of the way we diagnose it is with clinical symptoms.
Okay, so Dr. King testified that because he just sort of kind of fell over at work one day, that he had a brain injury and then dropped an egg to simulate it. When there was no CT scan, there was no brain scan, there was no anything to suggest that he actually injured his head in the fall. He just sort of guessed and then didn't do any medical data to back it up, and then broke an egg in a bowl to say that he had a brain injury. It was the most ridiculous of testimonies.
Because many TBIs.
Also, we need, I think, 25, 24 more likes in the next 6 minutes to save Valhalla. So if you guys could give a thumbs up, that would be great. We just need to get to 100. There's 142 of us watching, so we should be able to get there.
Or some of them at least, might not have any brain imaging changes.
Yeah, it was like
For example,
dehydration. He passed out or something.
Concussion is a mild TBI, and there are MRIs of people who have a concussion that would show nothing abnormal. So that's why we rely on clinical symptoms primarily when diagnosing TBIs.
Okay. So, and you didn't order or request any brain imaging tests?
No,
And why not?
because I didn't see any evidence of a TBI
Okay. And in fact, you asked the defendant specifically about that diner incident from 2020. Is that right?
I did.
And what did he say?
He told me that he had forgotten to eat one day and felt lightheaded and had gone to work, and instead of being able to sit down or lie down or eat something, he continued to work. It was a hot kitchen, steamed, he was carrying a lot of heavy things, and he felt lightheaded and he fell.
Okay. Now, I do want to clear up one other aspect of Dr. King's testimony. He testified that if a child were to get hurt and the parents not take the child to seek medical care, that would be physical abuse. Is that correct?
The term of not getting medical care for a child who needs it would be medical neglect.
It's medical neglect, right? Thank you. Now, Dr. King also testified that he viewed the video of the defendant torturing and killing the baby birds. Did you recall that testimony?
I do.
And you saw those videos as well?
I did.
Okay. And you also reviewed text messages from the defendant to his friend regarding that same bird incident. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. So Dr. King's assessment is that the defendant wanted them to feel the pain he was feeling. And he said it was a reflection of the defendant's mental impairment. And he also referenced tension reduction. Do you recall?
Yeah, that's exactly what it was. So he had blood pressure dropped, he fell over, but Dr. King tried to say that he suffered a head injury when he fell over, although there's nothing in a medical record or anything to suggest such a thing. He just sort of, well, he fell over, he must have hit his head, and here's an egg to show how that happens.
All that testimony?
I do.
Okay. Do you agree or disagree with Dr. King's assessment there?
I disagree. I asked the defendant very specifically about why he tortured the birds, and at no time did he tell me that it was to feel the birds.
I think it's
feel the pain
traumatic
that he
brain
was feeling,
injury.
or at no time did he tell me it was because of any sort of delusions or hallucinations. He told me very specifically that torturing the birds made him feel good, it made him feel pleasure, it made him feel power. And none of
Only
that
8 more away.
psychotic.
Now, his report to you regarding the torture of the birds, that's also reflected in the text messages the defendant sent to his friend, those themes of pleasure and power. Is that right?
Correct.
When I ask you about a feral child, now you heard the defendant or Dr. King's testimony that the defendant was essentially a feral child, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Now, if you could, doctor, please tell us what actually is a feral child.
So there's not a lot of scientific literature on the topic. I think perhaps it was being used in more of a colloquial sense, but in the scant literature that there
Forgot
is
about the
it,
feral
a
child.
feral child is typically described as someone who's been raised in the wild and away from human contact. For example, a child who can't speak because they don't know the English language or any language because they are in the wild. There's also other literature that refers to feral children as people who have trouble with authority and have multiple delinquent behavior on a regular basis as an adolescent or a child.
Okay, so with the record that you reviewed, the evidence in this case, the defendant texting his friend over 20,000 times throughout a period of a year, would he fit the definition of a feral child?
Not according to the scientific literature that I'm aware of, no.
And Dr. King also testified that the defendant's form of mental illness, if not treated, typically ends with deadly consequences. Do you agree with that statement?
I don't.
Tell me why.
So, as already stated, I don't believe the defendant met statutory criteria for a mental illness at the time of the offenses. But even assuming that what was meant was something like psychosis, it's just absolutely untrue that most people with serious mental illness commit violent acts. In fact, the research shows that the vast majority of violence in our country is caused by people without mental illness. Now, Dr. King then referenced suicide, and it is true that people with mental illness are more likely to harm themselves than other people. But I don't see how that particularly applies in this case, given that the defendant specifically did not want to commit suicide so that he could see the results of his actions. So I don't agree with that statement, and I don't think it's supported by the data.
Thank you, doctor. Now, Dr. King also diagnosed the defendant with obsessive compulsive disorder and indicated that it was the defendant's obsessive thoughts and compulsion that propelled him to take the lives of innocent people. That was his testimony. Do you agree with that?
I don't.
Tell me why.
Obsessive compulsive disorder is a diagnosis that's typically characterized by intrusive and unwanted thoughts that cause marked impairment or distress in an individual. I think in this case, there is significant evidence to suggest that the recurrent violent thoughts that the defendant had from a young age were not intrusive and unwanted, but rather enjoyed and liked. He said this to me not only in his own self-report, but it's also throughout the text messages. It's also in the jail records when they ask him about these violent thoughts. So I don't believe that any sort of clinical obsessions or compulsions propelled his behavior. I also think, again, it's important to look at the jail records where he's been seen very regularly in the days, weeks, months, and years after these offenses. There's no clinician that's diagnosed him with obsessive compulsive disorder there. He hasn't shown signs of obsessive compulsive disorder as we know it clinically. And so, no, I do not believe that that drove his actions on that day.
Now, doctor, you can understand, can't you, why it's hard to believe that when someone enjoys torture and methodically plans a mass murder, how that person can actually not.
We have 102 likes. Where are we? Yeah, time. Where did we go? We have 102 likes. Valhalla made it by like the skin of his teeth.
Be insane. You can understand how that's hard to understand, right?
Absolutely.
And tell me about that.
I can absolutely understand how it would be difficult to imagine how a sane person could commit mass murder. But the research does show us that mental illness does not account for most of the violence in our country. And while it's certainly true that there may have been episodes of mass murder where the person had some broad-based mental health concerns, the research just shows us that it's rare. So it's hard to imagine, but it is rare.
And again, doctor, I brought this up to you before, but it bears repeating. Someone can display signs of crisis and be in quote-unquote depression without actually meeting that definition of psychotic. Is that right?
Correct. Someone can have depression, they can have anxiety, and not meet criteria for the statutory definition of mental illness.
And is that your opinion what happened in this case?
That is my opinion in this case. In fact, it was my opinion that he was criminally responsible and that he understood the nature of what he was doing at the time of the shooting and the consequences of it.
Thank you, doctor. One moment.
Absolutely.
Ooh, this should be a short. We're going to go to cross in a minute. They're going to blame the parents. And then we should be done. I think this is their only rebuttal witness. By the way, at noon, I'm going to be on Laid Back News with Eric Hunley. I believe Chandler's going to be on there. Joe's always on there. I don't know who else is going to be on there. But at noon, wherever
Doctor,
we
you
are,
mentioned,
we'll pause it. Now I'm going to go do that and come back.
Brain
It's still
injury
going.
and your analysis of the defendant. Did you screen for any other issues? Something that's been brought up is fetal alcohol syndrome. Did you screen for that?
We screen for everything when we're doing this, or maybe screen is the wrong word. We consider every diagnosis when we're seeing a defendant for a forensic evaluation.
So tell me your opinion on specifically fetal alcohol syndrome.
Well, fetal alcohol syndrome is typically characterized by someone who had exposure to alcohol in the womb and is characterized by things like what we call dysmorphic facial features, meaning there's a typical facial presentation of people typically with fetal alcohol syndrome. But it's also characterized typically by things like intellectual disability, cognitive impairments, attention problems, impulsivity, things of that nature. And so, again, I don't write every diagnosis that I don't think he has in my reports. But in this particular case, if you're asking about fetal alcohol syndrome, there's no evidence that he's intellectually disabled. If anything, his IQ, even on Dr. King's testing, is average or above average. And no evidence of significant ADHD type symptoms or impulsivity. I don't believe he'd meet criteria for that disorder.
So he's got to get life. He's got to get life, even though he's a juvenile, because he's been charged as an adult and he pled guilty as an adult. He's got to get life. The purpose of this is to determine whether or not it's going to be life without the possibility of parole, or at the default that he gets the opportunity to have parole. Not that he's going to get out, but that opportunity is going to be there at some point down the road. So he's got to get life. But will he have the opportunity to get out at some point in the future is what we're trying to determine here.
Doctor.
It's a good question.
Thank you. Nothing further.
Thank you. Defense Cross.
Yes, thank you.
I think Dirk's a member.
Good morning, Doctor.
Good morning.
I want to talk first about your CV. And looking at your education, I'm not seeing any specialized training or certifications in treating children or adolescents with psychiatric illness. Is that correct?
I'm not board certified in child psychiatry. In general psychiatry residency, everyone does do rotations in child psychiatry.
Okay. Your CV also lists that from 2017.
There's absolutely no evidence of it, Jess. It was literally just a question. It was a hypothetical.
To 2018, you were a staff psychiatrist at St. Joseph Mercy. Is that correct?
Correct.
During that 1 year, were you seeing patients
Yes,
in the hospital or in an office setting?
in the hospital.
Adult wing, or were you dealing with pediatrics?
Adult.
Those are parents of the victim, I believe. But I wanted to pause real quick because Valhalla awaits. You won't chug a beer, you coward. Gifted 1 membership, and that membership was received by... Oh, actually gifted 2 memberships. The first one was received by somebody. Why can't I see this? I don't know why I can't see the first membership. The second membership was gifted to Gabby Selzer. Selzer? Sounds right. Selzer. We'll go with that. Oh, and then Jessica B was also gifted a membership. So awesome. Thank you very much for the 2 gifted memberships. If you guys are new, click on the membership tab and take the link to Discord. That's where I have all my member content.
So since July of 2019 to present, you've been employed with the center as you described, correct?
Correct.
All right. And you mentioned that you see patients that are hospitalized under court order, correct?
Correct.
And as well, you perform the competency and criminal responsibility examinations.
Correct.
Would you agree with me that part of your job is to diagnose and treat mental illness?
Correct.
Are children housed at the center?
They are not.
You stated that you have performed 525 criminal responsibility exams. Is that correct?
Forensic evaluation.
Forensic evaluations. So that is a combination of both, correct?
And some other ones, we do perform or have performed other evaluations at the center in the past.
Okay. How many juveniles have you examined?
Probably less than 5.
No, it's random.
How many juveniles charged with life offenses have you examined?
1.
Is that Mr. Crumbly?
Yes.
Is this the first time that you've testified at a Miller hearing?
Yes.
So before sitting in court and watching this hearing, were you familiar with the Miller factors?
I was. Yes.
How are the cases assigned
Jessica
to
B,
examiners
that's
at
you.
the center?
Mostly it is by random basis. We have a scheduling department that assigns the cases.
Were you aware that you were not the first doctor that was assigned to do the examination of Ethan Crumbly?
I was aware of that, yes.
Did you speak to the doctor that was first assigned to do the examination?
Only to ask for the flash drive that was in his possession.
Did you discuss the facts of the case with him?
No.
Do you recall when you were assigned to this case?
In February of 2022.
So I believe it's mandatory. Well, I mean, okay. So the sentencing guidelines in Michigan are not mandatory. But I believe the sentencing guidelines are life. So, I mean, in theory, the judge could, right? But I don't think they're going to. And if you were to charge him or sentence him to 25 years per murder for a total of 100 years, that's essentially life without the possibility of parole. Also, Michigan doesn't have consecutive sentences. We only have concurrent sentences. So if you sentenced him to 25 years per murder, that would only be 25 years. They're served concurrently. So that really wouldn't work. But assuming it would work, it would be constructively life, right? Which the U.S. Supreme Court says is cruel and unusual for juveniles, except for the very few. So it doesn't work for a number of reasons. And Valhalla awaits. You won't chug a beer, you coward. Gifted 10 memberships. Those were received by, oh God, okay. Amy Gale, Mark Green, Sandra 44, T. Clark, J. Lebgott, Nonsense, 1216, JB. Oh my God, these names, people. Graham, finally, son, something. That's a tough one. That was easy enough. The toughest one was easiest. Thank you very much for the gift of memberships. And all of you who received memberships, remember to click my membership tab, take you over to Discord. Make sure you give us your YouTube name, as ridiculous as it may be, so that we can match the membership list to the Discord list. And thanks again, Brandon.
Can you recall when you received the list of discovery items that you have noted in your report?
Again, the previous doctor who was assigned had the flash drive full of sources of information. So as to when he specifically gave it to me, I'm not sure.
So now Jessica, since she's a new member and just recently subscribed, she's going to be in with the Jody Area stream on Saturday. So when she's in there live, we need to ask her some questions about why she feels like Jody was justified in the stabby parts.
So your report is dated March 29th of 2022, correct?
Correct.
You note that you spoke with Mr. Keast on 3-1 and 3-11, correct?
Correct.
You detailed your process of when you are assigned to a case and the steps that you take. What is the reason you would talk to the prosecutor?
In a case such as this, since I spoke with the defense attorney as well, I wanted to speak to see if there was any other additional information they wanted me to have before seeing the defendant.
So I want to go over what you did review. I added up, you had it broken down by page numbers. I have that you reviewed 3,136 pages of discovery. Does that sound about right?
Yes, I'll take your word for it.
Okay. It looks like 20,688 messages between the other juvenile and Ethan.
Correct.
A Google Android extraction report, you noted there was 1,072 images.
Correct.
270 minutes of video, which is roughly 4.5 hours.
Correct.
You then met with Ethan one time.
Correct.
And that's on March 15th.
Correct.
Do you recall the start and stop time of your meeting?
It was 5 hours long.
I don't think the defense is going to get anywhere with this.
In
witness.
the
Just
items
move on.
that you
Just move on.
considered, you list evaluation unit personal history questionnaire. What is that?
When every defendant comes to the center, they're given this questionnaire. It has basic information, historical information like their name, date of birth, age. It also has things like places of employment. And then the back is for if they've ever been to any sort of psychiatric facilities. While we inquire about all of that, it's helpful to have it written down in advance to see if the defendant specifically wants to discuss anything with us.
Roughly how many questions does it have?
It's a front and back.
Okay. And do you have
Happy
that,
birthday,
do you
Beth.
have the patient completed in your presence, or that's something that's given to them prior to you arriving?
It's given to them prior to me arriving.
And you would agree with me what you just described is a lot of self-reported information.
Correct.
So I want to discuss what you've reviewed regarding this case since your report was authored. Obviously, it was some time ago. So it's my understanding that you reviewed Dr. Kadir's records from day one of the jail all the way up until the start of the hearing. Is that correct?
What I reviewed is day one from jail all the way up until the time that my report was authored. And then I was given additional records since that time, most recently up to July of this year.
Okay. You stated you watched the video of Ethan in jail in the restraints, correct?
Yes.
And
That
you
was
aren't
a
aware if there's
disturbing
any
video.
other videos of situations like that in the jail. You were just presented with one, correct?
Correct.
You viewed, obviously, Dr. King's report and updated jail records, correct?
Correct.
And then you watched the testimony of Dr. King and Dr. Kadir.
Correct.
You did not speak to any family members or Ethan's parents to either confirm or disprove anything that Ethan was reporting, correct?
No, correct.
Mr. Keys touched on this a little bit, but I think it's important, so I want to touch on it again. You would agree with me there's a few ways to diagnose mental illness or to assess mental illness.
Correct.
Okay. So we talked about looking at the brain directly, and that was not done, correct?
Correct, because it typically is not.
Okay. So if someone has a suspected brain injury or brain damage, you did say that imaging could be used, correct?
If there are signs and symptoms accompanying that, then we might consider brain imaging, yes.
You can test the brain using some of the testing that Dr. King used or that you mentioned, correct?
Correct?
And you didn't perform any of that testing, correct?
No.
Or you can use the symptoms that the patient
Hey,
provides, correct?
Combined with, again, our clinical judgment and the diagnostic manual and data. Yes, absolutely, that's important.
Okay. What is the DSM?
It's our diagnostic manual. It lists various diagnoses and the criteria that would be required to meet those diagnoses.
And what is it used for? Is it a tool?
It's again, yes, a tool that we would use to help diagnosis.
Okay. And to diagnose mental illness, correct?
Correct.
Did you use it in relation to these facts and in this case?
Yes.
According to the DSM, the signs of major depressive disorder are depressed mood most of the day, feeling sad, empty, hopelessness, loss of interest in pleasurable activities, difficulty sleeping, agitation, fatigue, feeling worthless, thoughts of death or suicide. Do you agree with me?
I do.
You would agree with me that Ethan reported every single one of those symptoms.
He reported many of those symptoms, yes.
According to the DSM, what is the definition of psychosis?
Psychosis is a symptom of diagnoses. So there's schizophrenia in the DSM, there's schizoaffective disorder. Psychosis in and of itself is not a diagnosis, it's a symptom.
Okay, and can you describe that symptom?
Typically, like I mentioned before, it's gross impairments in recognizing reality.
It's Beth's birthday.
What are delusions?
Delusions are fixed false beliefs that are non-reality based.
Seems like a very clinical answer.
Now, I want to go over your report. I know you have it with you. On page 7, you indicate that his parents' relationship was occasionally stressful for him. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
And he detailed that when he was living in Washington, and there was a situation that he recalls where he was very young, and he heard his mother yelling on the phone in the middle of the night. His mother told him that his dad was missing, correct?
Correct.
And told him that his father was at a waterfall and there to commit suicide, correct?
Correct.
And it's your understanding, or at least what Ethan relayed, is that he was then put on the phone with his father and he was crying and telling him to come back home and to not kill himself.
Correct.
You know, I usually rely on Jung Min for the DSM because she always has it and sends it to me, all the relevant portions. I should get one though, because I feel like you're right. They do misrepresent it all the time. The White Rabbit, good morning. Welcome. Yeah, the DSM is misrepresented all the time. Every time we have a case that involves the DSM, Jung Min is like, here, this is what it actually says. But she's not here this morning. I think she's working.
He also told you that his parents argued a lot.
Correct.
Moving on to page 8, you discussed preschool, and this has been discussed previously. He relays to you that he recalls in preschool where he's outside during recess, and he's watching cars go by, and he says to the lunch lady, man, wouldn't it be cool if the cars crashed and blew up the school? And the lunch lady was upset by that, correct?
Correct.
And he told you that's when he realized maybe other people didn't think about the things he thought about.
Correct.
So I want to go over what you have, I think is psychiatric history, page 9. He recalled his parents giving him half of a sleeping pill of his mom's prescription twice, correct?
Correct.
And he detailed that he had some sort of attack, and his parents reported to him that he was doing all this crazy stuff and saying, I see someone, and he was walking in the driveway in shorts, correct?
Correct.
And obviously, you've reviewed the text messages. Did you review the text messages between James and Jennifer?
Some, yes.
Okay. Do you recall reviewing the text message where they actually talk about this incident?
Yes.
Okay. He told you that he recalled asking for mental health within the last year, mental
Yes.
health care. Okay. And he detailed that on his 15th birthday, he got really upset and said, I want to see a therapist.
Mm-hmm.
You recall that? And he explained to you that at that point, he didn't want to move forward in life.
Yes.
I wanted to stay at that point. So when I realized I'm getting older, I needed help to get past that. Is that what he reported?
Correct.
And to your knowledge, he never saw a doctor or counselor, correct?
Correct.
You then discussed suicidal thoughts. He reported that he had suicidal thoughts for a year since 9th grade and actually one suicide attempt, correct?
That he reported, yes.
And that was in October of 2021?
Correct.
And he detailed that he took 8 to 10 allergy pills. He was really sad and anxious about moving forward and getting older, correct?
Correct.
And he details that he falls asleep and he wakes up the next morning sick.
Correct.
Wait, at age 15 or 16, he's concerned about getting older? Kids.
You then talk about the voices that I know Mr. Keese asked you about, and you spend a good deal of time talking about that. So he told you that he occasionally hears external voices, variably a man or woman's voice calling his name, correct?
Correct.
He heard external voices for a week or two when in jail after the offense, but stopped when he was on constant watch.
That was his report, yes.
He then tells you once he was taken off constant watch, he began hearing them occasionally, correct?
Correct.
And there was an incident where he heard, Ethan, can you hear me? Ethan, where are you?
Correct.
There was also conversation about an internal voice, correct?
Yes.
And he described that as he felt like it was his own voice, but it was the bad side of him.
Correct, like a conscience.
And he said the thoughts that are bad.
Correct.
Yeah, right. What's wrong with the
And he
generation
told you that
today?
the internal voice is currently not as bad as it was before, and that he's fighting it every day.
When I saw him at that time.
Yes. Now, you stated you went through these text messages. Did you go through the web browser history?
I did, yes.
Okay. The journal, the video he made the night before, the assignments, the emails from teachers asking that Ethan be seen by a counselor.
Yes.
Now, in your report, you picked specific messages from the other juvenile and Ethan to put in your report, correct? You obviously didn't list all of them.
Correct.
Okay. And you picked out what best suited your analysis or best suited your opinion, correct?
No, I tried to include every instance where he discussed mental illness at all.
Okay. And obviously it was to support your final conclusion, final opinion.
It was a source I used, again, as data, but I would never pick out ones just to support my own conclusion.
It is Beth's
in your
birthday.
report, Ethan details that in 8th grade, he was shown his first graphic video. Do you recall?
I do.
And someone showed him a video of a guy blowing his head off.
Correct.
And he detailed to you that he couldn't stop thinking about it. And a few weeks after seeing it, he started to get interested and then looked stuff up himself, correct?
Correct.
And he told you that he was addicted to watching videos of war and people dying.
Correct.
Now, you go over the issue with the birds in your report on page 30.
Does anyone notice the way this witness says correct is a little bit like the ex-girlfriend of Travis Rudolph? Correct.
7.
Anyone
And I
notice
know
that?
that Mr. Keast asked you tension release.
Just waiting for her to
and
say
you said you didn't
1000%
agree.
or yes.
Well, on page 37, Ethan tells you, I felt a relief feeling, a feeling in power, correct?
Correct.
He then details after 9th grade concluded, he recalled lying in bed for 3 days straight, watching movies and TV, correct?
Correct.
And he stated that he was only getting up to go to the bathroom or to get something to eat, correct?
Correct.
Correct.
You then move forward in time. So we're looking July, August of 2021. He tells you he had no social interaction with anyone other than B, his juvenile friend, correct?
Correct. Though again, when you look at the actual context,
Oh. What happened? Wait a minute. They just ended the stream automatically. Why would you do that? All right, hang on a second, guys. That's not me. Oh, that's annoying. What just happened here? Oh, my news stream. See, again, another reason why I need my own cameras in the courtroom. Why did you guys just end the stream? Oh, but anyways, happy birthday, Beth. Do you like my background? It's just for you. While we're doing this. All right, so what do you guys think thus far with this testimony that's been going on? Now that I'm big, this backdrop is messing with me, so I got to pull it down. Hang on. And there we go. Now we can see Jody's legs again and Jefferson and all that good stuff. All right. Talk amongst yourselves while I try to get the stream up and running again. Let's see here. Where are we? Do we have to go to Lawn and Crim? I don't want to go to Lawn and Crim. We might have to. Miller hearing. Yeah. We're going to have to until we get the other stream back up. All right. All right, let me pull this up.
Active treatment psychiatrist and therapy, and then was then scored months later as mild.
Can you guys hear it
correct?
okay?
Correct.
Let me know.
I want to discuss the definition that you have in your report of mental illness. In your report, it states a substantial disorder of thought or mood which significantly impairs judgment, behavior, capacity to recognize reality, or ability to cope with ordinary demands of life, correct?
Correct.
And in your opinion, you found that Ethan did not have mental illness as defined by statute.
Correct. At the time of the offenses.
Correct.
Correct. You then states, I recognize my opinion on this matter requires significant clarification. Why did you write that?
Because I could see that the perception of someone who's writing that they have hallucinations and writing that they have low mood and suicidal thoughts, when you read just those things, it comes to mind this person is mentally ill. So that's why I felt it required significant clarification to explain why that may not meet the criteria and why some of the things that he is reporting do not meet actual clinical diagnosis.
You say, I acknowledge that there is data that taken on the surface could initially suggest that Ethan experienced symptoms associated with a psychotic disturbance around the time of the offenses. You go on to talk about
I
the
can
text.
rewind
There's
it if
talking
you
about
need to.
ghosts or demons, external voices and shadows, hallucinations, the video the night before where he talks about those three voices, talks about a demon. But you state that, and I think you mentioned this earlier, you rationalize it with, well, the belief in a haunted house is not in itself a mental illness. So it's not uncommon when someone
The
is
defense is
watching
trying to put all the
scary
blame on the
movies.
parents.
So you're telling me each and every time that he has these incidents where he's either texting his mother or he's texting B, his juvenile friend, about things flying off the shelf, or doors closing, things falling, hearing footsteps, a toilet flushing, your explanation of that is he must have been watching scary movies during every single one of those events, and that's why he's reporting them.
So he's not watching them every single time, counselor, but he is watching them much of the time. And the other times, you need to look at the context of how he is acting outside of these self-reports. There's no report from, again, or there's no kind of clinical data in terms of hallucinating in Spanish class and having someone else see that hallucination, or being at work and having your friend also hallucinate it. So no, he's not watching horror movies every time, but when you look at all these different instances, there's just
We're
it
about
doesn't
4
line up
minutes
with true
behind, which is
psychosis for all the
consistent with
reasons
where
I
we
mentioned.
were when the
The
stream
things
went
that he
back.
does describe, like we just talked about, could be delusions or hallucinations. They could be.
It could be. I don't feel that the evidence supports that.
Now, the conversation or the mention that you made in your report about the voices. In the video, he says the voices are me. I am the voices. So these voices are his conscience rather than a psychotic illness. Is that what your opinion is?
In part, again, I asked him very specifically about those statements in the video, and he at no point told me that he was hallucinating when he made that video. He wasn't hallucinating on the day of the offense, and he wasn't hallucinating for days prior. So even if you take his hallucinations at face value, which again I disagree with, but even if you do, he specifically told me he wasn't psychotic or hallucinating in and around the time of the offenses.
Did you tell him what the definitions of those big words are? He's 15 years old, obviously doesn't have medical training. So
No, that's exactly right. That's why I don't think that he was lying. I think that he was misusing a clinical term. And that's why we as medical professionals have to tease that out.
So the voice that he talks about, not only in his journal, but also in that video, you're saying it's his conscience, correct?
Are you talking about what he calls the internal voice?
The internal voice, yes.
Yes, I do believe it's most consistent with something like a conscience. He identified it as the bad thoughts that he had had since he was a young child. And so again, he very specifically told me it's my voice, it's not an external voice, it's what I think about.
Okay. So is it normal that a 15-year-old boy has a voice in their head telling him to kill?
No, it's not normal. The question is it psychotic? And the answer is no.
So I understand that everyone has a conscience. I mean, for example, you're approaching a yellow light. You have a quick dialogue in your head. I really need to get home. I'm late, but I don't want a ticket. So are you telling this court that it's normal in a scenario for someone's conscience or internal voice to say, run the red light, hit as many cars as possible, swerve toward the kids in the walkway, don't stop for police? Is that normal?
I don't think anyone would say that the violent thoughts or desires to kill and torture that the defendant was having were normal. But we have to differentiate what is not normal from what is a clinical, statutorily defined mental illness. So in no way am I saying that those thoughts are normal or good, but they are also not psychotic.
Yes, he pled guilty.
Hearing a voice in your head telling you to do bad things could be delusions, could be psychosis.
It wouldn't be a delusion because that's not the definition of that. And again, a voice could be psychotic, but in this case, it was his own voice saying what the things that he liked to do in terms of the violent thoughts. And I don't believe it was psychotic.
So you say that there is no indication from objective sources that Ethan engaged in unusual behavior that would be typical of psychosis, correct?
Correct.
Okay, hang on, guys. I'm going to switch over. I have a better feed, and that's right where it was, so I'm going to jump over. Boost volume up, full screen. Let's go.
That would be typical of psychosis, correct?
Correct.
So again, psychosis is a disconnection from reality. Symptoms are delusions,
I don't think they would be.
hallucinations, talking incoherently, and agitation. It can cause one to harm themselves or become violent towards others. Would you agree with me?
I would, though some of those terms are very general.
So he's being treated as an adult. So because he's being treated as an adult and he has counsel, he can enter into a plea. The question you're posing is there's an exception to the rule that a child can't enter into a contract. For example, say a child was injured in a lawsuit and a lawsuit ensued. The child can't settle that lawsuit without the court approving it. So the court needs to approve the settlement. The party, the minor can't just enter into a contract. The parent can't enter into a contract for a child, but with court approval, it can. It's the same that applies here.
All like agitation, that could be psychotic. It also could just be agitation. So there, again, it kind of depends, but generally, yes. I would agree.
And after everything we just discussed, you don't think that's what we're looking at here?
I do not, no.
Okay. So the jail staff, you indicated that they never reported that he was responding to internal stimuli, and Mr. Keys had you define that. You would agree with me that not everyone who is responding to internal stimuli has visible symptoms, correct?
Responding to internal stimuli by definition is visible. So again, like if someone is actively hallucinating, what we typically see are visible signs of that. Again, the distraction, the difficulty in attending to a conversation, the speech disorganization. It would be quite atypical for someone with psychosis as severe as what is being postulated to display no visible signs.
Is there always signs and symptoms of mental illness at all? I mean, can someone have mental illness and you look at them and you would have no idea?
Brandon, that would be a breach of contract by Valhalla.
That's different than what we're talking about here.
I agree. It's different than psychosis.
But yes, absolutely. You can't just look at someone and necessarily tell that they have depression or anxiety.
Okay. You stated that you believe the motivation for his shooting did not appear to be based on a delusion or psychotic process. And you have in your report that Ethan felt like the thoughts to shoot the school was as if I saw a prophecy of my future and I had to fulfill it. I want to go over that again because you're saying it's not based on delusion. It's not based on psychotic process, but then he believes he has to fulfill a prophecy.
Again, I think the wording is very important, counselor. So he's saying it's as if I was having a prophecy. That's a turn of phrase. He at no point during the interview told me I had to shoot the school to fulfill a prophecy. He told me that he had been thinking about this for months and months, not because of a prophecy, but because he had been thinking about it. So when I asked him specifically, why did this happen? Were you hearing voices? Did you have any beliefs about it? He didn't keep referring back to this idea of a prophecy. In my analysis, that's very much a turn of phrase and not a delusion.
So obviously when you begin your
Aaron,
interviews,
post
you
your question
explain
again.
to the
We didn't
patient
answer
why
it.
you're there and the purpose of the interview, correct?
Correct.
So Ethan obviously understood what it was for.
Correct.
And obviously if he wanted to make himself out to be mentally ill at a higher degree as a way to minimize his actions, obviously he could have reported some very, very heightened symptoms, correct?
Correct.
Could have told you aliens and ghosts made him do it. He could start talking to voices while you're present with him, correct?
Correct.
And he didn't do that.
No, I didn't believe he was feigning or malingering at all.
I did answer Aaron's question. It was about whether or not the parents would be able to watch this. I doubt it very much. However, the parents' attorneys will be watching this, most definitely, and they should be.
And you have had interviews, I'm sure, where you believe that a patient is over-reporting or is saying things that you don't believe are true, correct?
Absolutely, yes.
And really what he told you in that interview did match up with the text messages to be, correct?
Correct.
The text messages between James and Jennifer, the one about the specific incident, correct?
Correct.
The fact, what he was Googling, what he was looking up, the videos he was watching, what he was writing in his journal, correct?
Yes, I felt he was very forthcoming.
Okay. And you agree with me that when you look at Dr. Kadir's records, he's reporting the same things there as well?
In terms of all of those things,
Correct.
I don't think he's discussed all of them, but yes.
So you would agree with me what Ethan has reported has been pretty consistent?
Yes.
So you mentioned the testing, and you stated that that testing only shows the symptoms on that day, or more closer in time to the exam rather than to the incident, correct?
Yes. What I said is that you can't necessarily extrapolate any results from a psychological test you do later and say it definitively proves they were thinking that 6 months prior or a year prior.
Okay.
I don't know what's going on with StreamYard, but none of the chat's not showing up anymore. The last thing I have is, Wendy, did you answer Aaron's question? So with that, I'm going to try to monitor it on another screen, but I can't pull it up. I don't know what's going on with StreamYard.
And I understand that, but again, you would agree with me, he's reporting the same things.
Yes, though what I would say is that I think absolutely his symptoms worsened once he was in jail and in isolation in a jail cell. So yes, he reports the same things in terms of depression, but the experience and life that he's in now is very different than what he was in November. So I don't think that you can correlate the two necessarily.
So again, I want to talk about the possibility of over-reporting, the possibility of having a patient come before you and tell you things that you don't necessarily believe, okay? And you stated you have had patients like that, correct?
I have. I didn't feel like this defendant was.
Okay. You actually testified in the case of People versus Hallam in December of 2022, where you discussed this same issue, correct? About
Correct.
over-reporting?
Correct.
And in that case, you were performing a criminal responsibility exam, correct?
Correct.
And in that case, after your initial evaluation, you had concerns that the defendant was not being truthful.
Correct, because in that case, it was very different. What he was telling me during the evaluation made me suspicious for malingering.
Okay.
So that's why I got a psychological test
Mhm.
to see if he was malingering in that moment that he was speaking to me.
Okay. And you testified that one of the signs that you look for when you're concerned with a patient feigning or intentionally producing symptoms of mental illness is them thrusting their illness forward in your face. Like, I want to tell you about this, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Ethan didn't do that, correct? He waited to be prompted and answered your questions.
Correct. As already stated, I had no suspicion that he was malingering during the evaluation.
Also in that trial, you testified self-reporting may not be reliable when different things are told to different people. We don't have that here either, correct? He's reporting the same thing.
Correct. He's been consistent.
You testified if someone had true mental illness, that was a psychotic illness, one would expect that the person had symptoms prior to the crime or prior to the incident, correct?
Correct.
And your testimony is that Ethan had no symptoms that were of psychotic nature leading up to November 30th. Is that correct?
That's correct. Again, counselor, he reported psychotic symptoms, but we have to do more than take self-report at face value. And when we use our clinical expertise and judgment to examine what he reported prior to the offense, because I acknowledge he reported it prior to the offense, it just simply doesn't match up with true clinical psychosis.
Yes, for those in the chat, the parents are in jail right now. Their bond is $250,000 each. They put their money towards hiring attorneys and experts rather than getting out of jail. It shouldn't be that high, in my opinion. They should be out, but they are currently in. So I don't think they're going to be able to be watching this.
And in that case, People versus Hallam, after your initial interview, you had him seen by a psychologist for testing, correct?
Correct. Again, because there was suspicion of malingering at the time that I saw him.
And you testified that a psychologist doing testing can be one piece of helpful data as you come to your opinion. You agree?
Absolutely. Again, one piece of data.
And in that case, you had Dr. Shields, I believe that is a doctor also at the center, correct?
Yes, she's a psychologist there.
You had her perform the MMPI-3, correct?
Correct.
Okay. You do not have training in performing these tests or reading the results, correct?
The way that we do it at the center is that psychologists are the ones performing and interpreting the testing. We as psychiatrists certainly refer for testing and consult with the psychologist on what question we have and what tests we think are legitimate to answer the question. So it's not that we have no training on it. We're certainly familiar with the tests and the results, but at the center, the psychologists conduct the tests.
Okay. And are you familiar with that MMPI-3 test?
I am.
Okay. So not only is it a 330 question test of self-reporting signs and symptoms of mental illness, there's a validity scale built in.
Yes, it's one of the ones of Dr. King's testing, the majority of which did not have them. That is one of the ones that did.
Okay. So it shows the score as it relates to the self-reported information, but then also gives you a score or indication as to whether the symptoms that are being reported are feigning or untrue, correct?
Correct.
Do you agree that any score above 60 causes some concern or notes that there's some psychiatric things going on there?
Correct.
Okay.
Again, it depends on what scale, but yes.
Sure. Did you go over the results of that test?
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to draw your attention to...
Right, Flex? Wouldn't that be interesting? I kind of want to take the test myself as well. I want to see what it shows. It's kind of like taking a breathalyzer, you know. I'm just curious.
Page 35 of Dr. King's report.
Okay.
Actually, let's go to 34 first.
Okay.
Which version are we referring to?
The one that was admitted by myself.
I'll try to talk more for you, Wendy.
That,
3?
Your Honor, it would be in my defendant's exhibit binder, which is Exhibit N as in Nancy.
Okay.
So let's look at 34. There is it looks like a validity scale. Is that correct?
Yes.
And following, there is some statements. It says, a review of the validity scale indicates Ethan's T-score is 48, which is an indication that his responses were in the normal range for inconsistency reporting, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So again, we're looking at anything
How do you flunk a
above
personality
60. So
test?
let's go through the results here. So still on that page on 34, it says Ethan's score 75 is elevated. Let me see. Infrequent responses. Let's go to page 35. So let's go through the actual scores. So a review of higher order and
This is gonna take us
restructured
all the way
clinical
through lunch.
scales indicates elevations
We're
of
only 6
EID,
minutes
which
behind,
is
though.
emotional internalizing dysfunction. We have a score of 75, correct?
Yes, but I would just note now the scales you're talking about are a little different, but
Okay. We have under thought disorder, score of 85.
correct.
Demoralization, score of 79.
Yes.
Ideas of persecution, indicated when someone feels he is devalued, trapped, constantly persecuted with no means of escape. We have an 80, correct?
Correct.
I'm sorry, Ms. Lawson, before you move on.
Correct.
Start with page 34. I can't-
35. I apologize. What I just read was on the bottom of page 35.
She does say it cracked.
Let's move to page 36, the bottom. Helplessness and hopelessness, score is 70.
Yes.
Obsessive compulsive, score is 80.
Yes.
Following page 37 at the bottom. Negative school attitude, score is 65.
Yes.
Family
Hey,
problems,
Ashton.
score is 80.
Yes.
Page 38 at the bottom. I don't know how to pronounce the word that is in quotations. Can you help me?
Are you talking about
In
psychoticism?
parentheses. Yes.
Yeah.
I was going to butcher that. So, which is indicative of someone who has pervasive and intrusive thoughts. His score is 80, correct?
Correct.
You would agree with me that this test can give you some good information, correct?
Absolutely. It's one piece of data to consider.
Again, you did not have this test done with Ethan, yes or no?
No, because again, it shows what he was experiencing and reporting at the time the test was given.
You did not have any psychologist come and do any type of testing with Ethan, correct?
No, I did not.
All right, let's go back to your report. You state on page 62, it is my opinion that there was no indication that these reported symptoms of depression were severe enough to significantly impair his judgment, behavior, capacity to recognize reality, or his ability to cope with the ordinary demands of life at the time of the alleged incident. Correct?
Correct.
I want to talk about the ordinary demands of life. There is a lot of text messages, writings in his journal, in the video about school, specifically about college, the progression of life from being a kid. In review of everything, that is a huge issue for Ethan, correct? He can't get over the fact that he's going to get older, things are going to change, that he doesn't have a plan, that he's going to either be dead or homeless, correct?
He reported that, yes.
Okay.
I don't personally know them. I know them professionally, but I don't hang out with them or anything, but I do know them, including Wednesday Adams, rather.
Obviously, growing up is a demand of life.
I suppose so.
And it's still your opinion that you feel he was able to cope with those ordinary demands of life, even though he mentions that he is so struggling with them in multiple avenues.
Yes, because again, when you look at his functional status in his life, he's reporting these things. But when you look at what he's actually doing on a day-to-day basis, I don't believe he met that functional impairment criteria.
But you're aware he quit.
And StreamYard is messing up. I cannot pull up any of the chats, but Ashton, thank you very much for the $10 super chat. Thanks for keeping an eye on this case. This one has a lot of ramifications. Yes, especially with the parents. Like, I'm not so much concerned about Ethan Crumbley because he kind of did it and admitted to it and pled guilty. But the state is arguing the very opposite position that they're going to be arguing in a few months against the parents. And that is very interesting to me. And so I will be covering the parents' case. I will have my own cameras in the courtroom, which I'm very excited about. Just a question of when that's actually going to happen. My last conversation with the court, which was last week, it sounds like it's probably going to be January for the parents' trial, but we are all set to have my cameras and the audio feed and everything set up for that trial.
The bowling team, he stopped working. And once his friend was there, he essentially would go to school and come home, and that's it.
Well, again, even in the month after his friend cut off contact, even in that month, he was doing things that brought him pleasure and that he engaged in terms of other hobbies and activities. He was future oriented, which is another thing that we look for when we look at major depression. So he was hopeful that a girl in school that he liked him back. And you even mentioned how the day before the offenses, that almost caused him, in his own report, to not go through with the shooting. So he was future oriented. He was doing things that he thought were fun. When you look at his daily activities, no, I don't think that he met that criteria.
When you
That's interesting. The fact that he had a girl that he liked, but then she didn't like him, and that made him more depressed. Like he found out that his crush didn't like him back, and these were all kinds of things. This kid was going through normal 15-year-old stuff, in my opinion, but they're making it out to be way, way, way worse than it actually is, trying to diagnose him with something that probably isn't there. It's just sort of normal 15-year-old angst and issues going on. Valhalla awaits. You can't chug a beer, you coward. Just gave $50 in a super chat. Thank you very much. Do we really want YouTube to take this? It's cut. No, we don't. But I'll still take the 66% after YouTube's cut. Or should the designated drinker honor his obligations? I am going to defer. Now, I will say Valhalla awaits. You can't chug a beer, you coward. The agreement was that Valhalla was supposed to drink a beer for all of your super chats. However, I don't believe there was a timeline attached to it. Therefore, Valhalla can, at his own diligence, consume that alcohol. And so we'll let him gauge the timing of such event, since there was not a timeline in place as part of the agreement. Oh, now what? Let me shut this down. Why is it doing that to me?
Say future oriented. He talks about going to prison. Is that what you consider future oriented? He's looking forward to that?
So he was very aware of the
Mhm.
consequences of his behavior.
Okay. Let's talk about the lack of sleep. You stated, obviously, in looking at those text messages, you can see that he is texting very late into the night, correct?
Yes, absolutely.
And your opinion on that is, well, basically it's chronic. It's not something that just occurred around the crime. So really that doesn't play into your opinion.
No, it did play into my opinion. What I was looking at specifically is whether he exhibited signs of mania, which often, would fit criteria for that major mood disorder. And when we look at his sleep patterns, not only were they chronic, but he had what's called very poor sleep hygiene. So he was drinking liters of Mountain Dew every night, or frequently at night.
Oh, come on, I did
Staying
that.
up very late and then sleeping during the day. There's text messages with his friends, even in the months prior, that he said that he's basically nocturnal. So not necessarily that he was getting no sleep, it's that his sleep schedule was altered. And when you look at something like mania, that's a decreased need for sleep where someone's not feeling tired. And that's not what we saw here. This wasn't a decreased need for sleep. It was a poor sleep hygiene with sleep at different times of the day.
Yeah, normal stuff.
Consistent with mania.
Normal
Obviously,
stuff.
in looking at his attendance record, he was attending school extremely regularly. So if he's up till 1, 2, or 3 in the morning, obviously he's then at school at 7:30 or 7:45, correct?
What he told me is that in the summer, he was nocturnal, so he was sleeping during the day. And then as school started in the fall of 2021, he would go to bed late and wake up about 4 to 5 hours later, getting that less amount of sleep, but he would feel very tired. That's a differentiating factor from something like mania, where the person feels like they don't need to sleep. They feel like they have tons of energy despite getting inadequate amounts. So this was not that. He was quite tired and feeling the effects.
Yeah, so a normal teenage boy.
You would agree with me that obviously the brain needs rest and the brain needs food to function properly.
Sure.
I want to talk about
I had cases of Mountain Dew.
your comment
as a kid.
about the violent thoughts. You stated that violent thoughts have been present since preschool. I'm talking about page 67. And he had previously dealt with them in other ways instead of carrying out a mass shooting. So you list that he dealt with those violent thoughts by playing video games, by killing animals, and going to a shooting range or watching movies, correct?
Correct.
I need help understanding this because you say he does not fit the definition of having mental illness. And then you say he's been able to control these violent voices by killing animals. So he should have been able to stay home that day and torture a bird instead of doing what he did.
So again, counselor, I understand it's very hard to imagine how someone who's sane can torture animals and who can commit mass murder. But the fact remains that they are, and they do. It's
That's a
not,
little
not everyone who
abnormal.
tortures an animal, it does it because of psychosis.
Torturing an
or because
animal is a
of
little
mental
off.
illness. It may seem completely horrible or illogical to people who are not in that situation, but it doesn't automatically equate to mental illness. So the point I was making in this paragraph, where I was talking about his ability to conform his conduct to the requirements of the law at the time of the offense, what we mean by that is, did he have alternative courses of action that he could have chosen instead of shooting the people at the school? And he demonstrated he had multiple alternatives. We might not agree with them, but he was able to deal with those urges in other ways rather than killing people. And that included killing animals. It's not great, but he was able to do things other than killing people, and he chose not to.
You stated in your report that Mr. Crumbley's comportment with police and jail staff following the shooting suggests that he is able to engage in appropriate behavior surrounding this period of time, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And again, I know we talked about this before. Mental illness presents itself in many ways, correct?
Yes and no, counselor. If someone's acutely psychotic,
Ooh, that was
presents in a
condescending.
typical way. So
Just a
yes,
little
everyone is
condescending.
different, and anxiety might present differently than depression, but there are set things that we expect clinically if someone is acutely psychotic, and he did not display any of those.
Okay, so I asked more specifically just about mental illness.
Sure.
So
then
psychosis
yes.
isn't the only type of mental illness. You would agree with me?
Correct.
Okay. Not everybody with debilitating mental illness is walking down the street and talking to voices. You would agree with me?
Correct.
Okay. And I believe you touched on this before. A psychotic episode doesn't last perpetually, correct? It's not forever.
Correct.
Okay. So someone may be having a psychotic episode and then return to reality.
Not in the way that this was displayed, no. Because again, without intervention, without some sort of antipsychotic treatment or psychiatric intervention, it would be very atypical for someone to be acutely psychotic and hallucinating and show no signs of that afterwards or in the days, weeks, and months following the offense.
You testified earlier that there was no bizarre behavior. Is your testimony that shooting fellow students is not bizarre
Valhalla,
behavior?
birds aren't real.
Not in a way that indicates mental illness, no. Again, we're not saying that it's good behavior or that it's normal behavior.
Indigo, yes,
Not
exactly,
all
right?
murder, not all violence is attributable to mental illness.
I want to finish with talking about the form of your report. You would agree with me that when you're doing a particular examination like the one you did here for criminal responsibility, there's a form or a rubric that is used.
I don't know if it's a rubric, but yes, we have reports with standard language, for example, the statutory language that is similar from one report to the other.
Okay. And would it be fair to assume that when you started with the
Yes, like the banner says, Ashton, this is cross on the state's rebuttal witness, Dr. Lisa Anaker. So this is the state's rebuttal witness. This should be the last witness, but it's a state witness, and right now the defense counsel is doing the cross-examination.
center, you read other people's reports or you became familiar with how other doctors were doing their reports?
Yes.
Okay. I want to go over another report that you completed. I apologize for the microphone. Because of the sensitive nature, obviously, of the defendant's name, I'm just going to call him MC. May I approach the witness, Your Honor?
Yes,
I don't intend to admit this.
thank you.
Thank you.
When you have a moment, can you review that report and see if that is one that you authored?
Yes, I did.
So I'd like to compare the reports that you did for Ethan and this other defendant that we're calling MC.
Okay.
So if you could go to the first page of the report, and Your Honor, I will always give you the report pages for Ethan, since that's the report that you have in front of you.
Thank you.
So page 1, the bottom of the first paragraph, you would agree with me that in both reports you write, this report summarizes findings from his or her evaluation and my reasoning with respect to my opinion regarding his mental state at the time of the offenses referenced above. You would agree with me it's the same in both reports?
Correct, because the purpose of the evaluation is the same.
Mm-hmm. All right, let's go to page 57 of Ethan's report.
I want to point out, I wish I could pull up chats. That would be really nice. But Porcelain Thunder, gangsters aren't psychotic. It's a lack of value for life. That's true. And I think that's what this witness is trying to say, that just because he doesn't value life the same way we do doesn't mean he's psychotic, right? Chiri,
And we're
have a
looking
good
at
one.
page
Go say
19
hi
in
to
the
Solomon
report
and
of
Dylan for me.
MC. Obviously, you stated you quote the exact same applicable statute, correct?
Correct. The statute is the same for criminal responsibility evaluations.
Okay. Page 58, section under conclusions and opinions relative to criminal responsibility. That is page 19 in the other report.
I
Correct.
saw that, Sean Bird.
You would agree with me?
Also, I would say that it looks like probably a family member of one of the victims. I doubt that person would be allowed to wear that shirt during the Crumley parents' trial. This is not a trial. This is a sentencing thing. But I still feel like it's kind of inappropriate to wear it in court. If it was somebody else, they wouldn't allow it. Oh, no.
Paragraph begins to reiterate, according to Michigan law, a person is deemed, and it goes on. You would agree with me that that section is completely the same?
Judge, I'm just going to object as irrelevance. I believe what counsel's trying to do is show that this doctor's own work product, her own work product, is similar to her work product in this case. When Dr. King testified, he was cross-examined about taking the conclusions of Dr. Carol Holden and adopting them as his own, and then testified it was the rubric, and that's why that happened. This line of questioning has no relevance to that topic because this is Dr. Anaker's own work product. So I object.
Thank you. Your response relevant.
Your Honor, in response, obviously they were attacking Dr. King because the report was similar to someone else's report. The point of what I am going through here, and I can speed it up to the opinion that she has, it is the exact same wording, and that was attacked very, very harshly when it came to Dr. King. So whether he was using a rubric from a different doctor or using a report from a different case, it is a different case and a different set of facts. So if the summary opinion that she has signed here is the exact same in this other case that she has reviewed, I believe that it's relevant.
Thank you. If you could please get to the point, I'm going to sustain the objection, but you may ask the question about the conclusion.
Thank you, Judge.
Of course.
Getting a little
Let's
feisty.
move to the opinion then.
Yes, let's.
Let's go to opinion regarding mental illness.
Yes.
That is page 59 on Ethan's report, page 20 of MC. You would agree with me that both reports state regarding the question of whether you substitute a new patient's name in, had a mental illness as defined by statute at the time of the alleged incident for which he is charged. It is my opinion that he did not, correct?
Correct, because I also thought that patient did not have a mental illness. That's just stating my opinion.
Sure, and it's the exact same sentence structure, the exact same sentence, correct?
All it's stating is regarding.
I'm asking yes or no. Is it the
Yes.
same?
Yes.
It's getting heated. Cat fight.
Let's move then to opinion regarding relevant capacities.
Sandra, 44. Take care.
That is page
Say hi
64
to everyone over
on
there for me.
Ethan's report, page 24 on the other report. You would agree with me that it is the exact same except the name is switched.
It's a restatement of the statutory guidelines.
I'm asking yes or no. Is it the same except you switch out the name?
Yes, because the statutory guidelines are the same.
How is the expert not a member
Let's
of
move to
my
the very last
channel?
page of your report
Okay.
and of Ethan's report. Summary opinion. Would you agree with me? It is word for word the same, except you switch out the person's name.
Because it is relisting the statutory.
I'm asking yes
definition
or
of
no, ma'am.
illness. Yes, counselor.
And that is your summary opinion. It is the exact same in both cases. You're switching out the name.
Because you can't change the statute. The definition is the same, no matter how you write it. So what I am restating in my summary opinion in both cases is that I did not believe the person met the statutory definition. So yes, it is the same.
I have nothing further. Thank you very much.
Sit down. I had a question.
Absolutely.
Going back to Dr. King's report, you had started at page 34. Under the validity scale, allow the doctor an opportunity to get there. specifically page 34 of Dr. King's report.
Okay,
Please let me know when you've gotten there.
yes.
It says a review of the validity scale BRIN-R indicates Ethan T-score is 48, which is an indication that his responses were within the normal range for inconsistent C reporting.
Wait, what happened? What is going on? Oh, of course it goes dead. Jeez. These feeds, again, why I want my own cameras.
That he was reporting, correct?
I did not think he was feigning.
Nothing further.
Thank you. People
Thank you.
regret.
We're
Thank
9
you.
minutes behind. It's not bad.
Doctor, you're the same person today as you were in March of 22, right?
Yes,
And this
Stupid
report
question.
from June the 1st, 2023, this is your work product.
yes,
Okay, and there's only one statute defining mental illness, is that correct?
correct.
And in fact, you're actually duty bound to follow that statute.
And to cite it several times in my report.
And that is the statute. That's the only statute that guides you in this analysis. Is that correct?
Correct.
So when you're being asked if it's the same language verbatim, it's because that's all that's there. Am I right?
Correct. There's no other way to state that.
Okay. Now, we shouldn't get too much into detail on this other individual, but you did indicate that that opinion requires some clarification. Just tell us why.
Are you talking about this report
This
or the
June
one
1st,
he-
2023 report you just asked
Counselor,
about.
okay, because Counselor also referenced a different case as well. So what is, sorry. what
So
is-
you were cross-examined that in your conclusion section, you indicated regarding the question of whether the individual had a mental illness as defined by statute, is it my opinion that he did not? I recognize my opinion on this matter requires clarification. So tell me about that.
Of this other individual?
Correct.
So again, that was a different case where I was again asked to offer an opinion on criminal responsibility. And in that case, again, there was some question about mental illness. In this particular case, if I recall correctly, the defendant had a history of mental illness, had been psychiatrically hospitalized. And so the question was, did the symptoms he previously experienced, was that impacting him at the time of the offense?
Now, doctor, is it the same thing to use your own work product as it is to take somebody else's and draw conclusions when the data doesn't support it?
No,
Okay, and would you do that?
no.
And it's probably unethical to do so, wouldn't you agree?
If anything, it would be careless to do. If it was done on purpose, I suppose it would be unethical.
Now, doctor, I'd like to refer you back to Dr. King's report, the page that Judge Rowe just referred to, page 34.
Yes,
So the judge indicated that even on Dr. King's own validity scales, he indicated that the defendant, at least in January of 2023, when these tests were conducted, he over-reported symptoms.
at least based on this scale, there was some indication of that, yes.
Okay. And you decided not to use these sorts of tests when you could have referred to a psychologist had you wished to, and you decided not to because why?
Well, for multiple reasons. One is that I didn't think he was malingering. I didn't have a specific question in my mind that he was feigning what he was telling me. He was forthright. And also because, again, my job for a criminal responsibility evaluation is to look at their mental state at the time of the offenses. And psychological testing is more contemporaneous. So
Meaning when the tests are conducted.
correct. So results that you get of a test in January of 2023 are not necessarily applicable to November of 2021.
So the next page, page 35, the last paragraph indicates that ideas of persecution, in parentheses, indicates someone who feels that he is devalued and trapped and distrapped and constantly persecuted with no means of escape. Now, wouldn't you expect someone to be in a jail cell for over a year to have some of those kind of feelings?
It's very possible, yes.
Are you aware of the recent changes in federal law regarding guidelines housing juveniles in an adult jail?
Yes.
So this defendant could be within neither sight nor sound of another adult prisoner. You know that?
Yes.
So that would contribute potentially to some of those feelings.
Very potentially, yes.
And again, this test was taken a year after the shooting, a year or more.
Correct. Over a year later.
I'm just looking at Mani's comment about her back hurts just watching this witness. I was thinking, is this witness, does she use posture to exaggerate certain physical features of herself, or does she always sit like that?
Now, I just want to show you something. This has been admitted as Exhibit 42. This is just a snippet of the in-car transport right after the shooting, right when the defendant surrendered. Now, that's the defendant on screen in the back of the police car. Is that right?
Yes.
Seems facts, not in evidence. We haven't seen this video yet. Surprised they're using this right now.
Do you see any signs of response to internal stimuli in this video?
No, I would note that his face isn't always in frame in this video, but in the next video, which is him at the substation.
Exhibit 43.
Could you please pause this?
I'm sorry, please go ahead.
Yes, what I was saying is that his face isn't always in frame in that video,
mask,
so
yeah.
you can't
He's a
always
mask.
tell, again, what he's looking at or doing, but he's certainly not moving around a lot. He's not speaking. There's no audio. The first audio, I believe, is when he asked to have his toilet paper taken out of his ears when he gets out of the car. But the next
Yeah, this is
video
redirect.
of
Why are they
him
allowing
in the
this?
police substation, he's shown for an extended period of time talking with police, talking with his parents, and then sitting calmly as well, alone in the room.
I'm going to go ahead and play a portion of that. That's Exhibit 43 on the screen here. This is the defendant in the corner of an interview room in Oakland County Jail. Is that right?
Yes,
And this is again right after the defendant was arrested?
yes, or it's perhaps in the substation.
Okay. Correct. Thank you. Substation. The noise we're hearing, is that the defendant making a noise with his feet?
It's his shoes, yep.
Now again, do you note any signs of psychosis here?
No.
Give me just a few minutes, okay?
So that was a police officer indicating the defendant just be a few minutes, and he responded to that.
Yep, he nodded relevantly.
Yep. All right, young man, go ahead and stand up there around for me. Thank you. You want it on the wall or? Yeah, it's fine. Right hand or left hand, young man? Right hand, good. Okay. Sitting early there then. I'm gonna take the shoes off.
And again, the defendant responded appropriately to a question about if he's right-handed or left-handed.
He did, and he follows commands.
There you go. Go ahead and have a seat for me. You can take both your shoes off.
Pause it for a second here. The timestamp is November 30th, 2021, 14:35. So that's 2:35 in the afternoon. Is that right?
That's right.
And the defendant committed these murders 12:51 p.m. So this is just a short time after the murders. Is that right?
Yes.
I'm not going to play too much more. I just want to make sure you can verify you don't see any signs of psychosis.
Thank you. Get your right one out to me. Thank you. The other one? Thanks. What's your name? Ethan. Ethan, what's your last name? Crumbly. What is it? Crumbly. Crumbly? Crumbley. All right, keep back here for a second.
Okay, again, Doctor, now at 14:36 on the timestamp, one of the investigators is asking some basic information from the defendant, and he responds to that.
He does.
Is this significant to you?
Yes, he's responding relevantly. He's paying attention. He's not speaking out of turn. His speech isn't disorganized. He goes on to answer more questions, and later his parents come in and he speaks with them as well.
Okay. Now, you mentioned toilet paper in the ears. Did you come to learn in your interview of the defendant in the review of the evidence in this case that the defendant took steps to protect his hearing by stuffing toilet paper in his ears?
Yes.
Did you also learn the defendant went to the bathroom multiple times before the shooting occurred to load the firearm?
Yes.
Okay. What does that signify to you, if anything?
It suggests the capacity for planning and also for delay. So again, when we think for a criminal responsibility evaluation of someone's ability to conform their conduct, the ability to delay things is significant, because if someone is so overwhelmed with mental illness or psychosis, they're usually impulsive. They may act very impulsively. But in this case, the defendant went multiple times into the bathroom at different points prior to the shooting to load the gun or get the bullets out. It was a multi-step process. And that suggests that he had the capacity for delay. He could have just done it all at once the first time if he just couldn't wait because he was so overcome with delusions or hallucinations. But that's not what happened. And instead, it was very planned.
I see all of this as being favorable to the parents' defense.
So capacity for delay.
I want this witness testifying in favor of the parents.
Yes.
You were asked early on in cross-examination if you spoke with the prosecutor's office, specifically me. Do you recall that?
Yes.
And in fact, you also spoke with Ms. Lofton too.
Yes.
Okay. And is it your goal to obtain as much information as possible?
Absolutely.
Why?
Because the more data, the better in forensic evaluations. We don't want to just rely on one piece of data. We want the defendant's self-report. We want all of the available data that we can get, and we want to use our clinical judgment. That's how we come to conclusions.
Okay. Now, doctor, you were asked about some things the defendant said to you during your forensic interview of the defendant. You recall that?
Yes.
Okay. And the defendant also said that, this is page 42 of your report. He said, when I got the gun, I was like, I have it, let's do it. And I was like, it's a crazy idea, but it just kept coming.
So, Sean, I doubt she'd be willing to testify in the parents' though. However, there's a report, and she has testified, and she could be subpoenaed as kind of a reluctant witness. She could be subpoenaed to testify. And if she says anything that's different from what she says here, she could be impeached with the transcripts from here. So she might not be willing to, but she could be forced to.
He added that owning a 9mm made me feel like, oh my God, I'm awesome. He stated he'd like to show the gun to his father and say, I'm a bigger man because I have a bigger gun. He said that to you?
He did.
And then he also told you about how the day of the shooting, he set his alarm for 5 a.m. to wake up and to obtain the weapon. That's
Correct.
on page 44.
Correct. He told me that he would often sleep through his alarm, but on the morning of the shooting specifically woke up at that time because he knew his parents would be asleep so that he could obtain the weapon.
Okay. And at that point, he already had known where the gun was at and the bullets were at.
Correct.
So I want to go back to something that Dr. King testified to regarding suicidal ideation. Now, let's be clear, that is not a sign of psychosis, correct?
Correct.
Okay, and can you please explain that to me again?
Suicidal thoughts are not the same as psychosis. Psychosis is gross impairments in recognizing reality. Suicidal thoughts may seem illogical to people, but people can be suicidal for multiple reasons, and they're not considered the same thing medically.
As a mental health professional, why is it concerning to you when you hear somebody testify to that?
Well, it's not accurate.
There's also stigmatized mental illness and treatment for mental illness?
Yes. Again, psychosis, suicidal thoughts, mental illness in general is heavily stigmatized in our country at times. And as mental health professionals, we're always trying to destigmatize mental illness and allow people to feel comfortable to get the help that they need.
Dr. Finally, you were asked about the DSM and the symptoms of major depressive disorder. And you indicated that the defendant did exhibit some of those symptoms, but you still did not find a diagnosis of major depressive disorder with severe psychotic features. Is that right?
Correct.
Explain to me more.
So many of the disorders in the DSM have criteria that you have to meet, 5 of 7 or 4 of 8. But you also have to have a level of functional impairment along with the diagnosis to make it a true diagnosis. Because if someone is depressed, but they're going about their life as usual, they might not meet criteria for a major depressive disorder. So again, I think that the questions were about the major depressive disorder diagnosis, and I'm certainly not contesting that the defendant had mood symptoms that were exhibited back at least in times of the spring and as time went on. But in my opinion, that level of functional impairment wasn't there to make that diagnosis a legitimate one.
And so, again, you're not contesting that he exhibited signs of depression and that there was leakage in this case, correct?
Correct.
And then you take the text messages to his friend at face value that back at least the spring of 21, he was asking for help. Is that right?
Correct, yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
But he could still, on November the 30th of 2021, appreciate the wrongfulness of his conduct and reform his actions should he have chosen to do so.
That's my opinion, yes.
Thank you. Nothing further.
Thank you. With that, any reason why this witness should not be excused?
Not from the people, Judge.
None at all.
Thank you, doctor. You may step down. You may also leave the courthouse.
Thank you.
My understanding is that they're going to take a short recess and then go into oral
Before
arguments.
rest our rebuttal case, I just want to confirm the court has exhibits 1 through 64 admitted and 66. I believe 65 was introduced but not admitted.
Thank you. I have admitted 1 through 62. I have defendants A through W. I have people 63, 64 have been admitted. 65 was offered but not admitted. And
All right, the
66
witch,
has
take
been
care.
admitted.
Thank you, Judge.
With that, we're going to take about a.
Is it Gemini the witch?
Not from the people. Thank you.
Thank you. People rest.
Yes, Judge. Thank you.
With that, we'll take about a 10 to 15 minute break. When we return, I will hear closing arguments from both sides.
Thank you, Judge.
With that, deputies, you may take the defendant. Those in the courtroom, please be seated until the defendant is executed.
He is going to be wearing orange for the majority of the rest of his life, if not forever. Yeah, I know they're still on recess, but they should be coming back in a few minutes. Oh, look at this guy's face. He looks happy. He looks happy to be there. What's your name, fella? All right, so we are live. We are live. Kira Rayner. Sorry, I can't pull up super chats right now. I can't pull up any chats because StreamYard's being a pain. But I have $2 Canadian. Psychotic break are sudden, not an excuse, but fact. Psychotic breaks are sudden. Yeah, they can be sudden. What we're talking about is two different things. So we're not trying to say that, no one's trying to say that Ethan is legally insane for the purposes of culpability, like not guilty by reason of insanity. I think what the defense was doing was trying to establish some sort of mental health disorder that is treatable. Therefore, his actions can be mitigated. He is potentially treatable, rehabilitated, or rehabilitatable, and so therefore he should get possibility of parole. Valhalla awaits. You chug a beer. You won't chug a beer, you coward. With a $2 super chat. Why can't you stream? I can stream. I just can't pull up super chats on the stream because StreamYard is being a pain in the ass right now. It all of a sudden just stopped. All right, so 1163526 or 62 rather. Jeez, I need coffee. Be right back. Enlarged prostate. Yes, Valhalla awaits. It's an enlarged prostate. Valhalla awaits. You can't chug a beer, you coward. Well, I don't want it to be confused with you, Valhalla, right? I could just say Brandon, but that's not the name. We know it's Brandon, but it's Valhalla awaits. You can't chug a beer, you coward. And, I just want to make sure I'm clear in who I'm referencing in the chat. Let's see. Am I saying your name right? Is it Tira Rayner? What is this cameraman doing? He's making me dizzy. With the $5 Canadian super chat. His counsel is correct. Psychotic disorders can last for months or less and only occur once, or they can also last for 6 months or longer. Yes, it is very irregular. There is no set timeline for these things. We understand that. I think what the doctor was saying is based off of my review. At the time of the pew, he was not he was not exhibiting any sort of psychotic signs or anything like that. And while he had an episode in May of 2023, so just a few months ago, there was nothing going on that would indicate any sort of mental health disorder at the time of the pew-pewing. So, Valhalla awaits. You won't chug a beer, you coward, is downloading his Cash App right now. So, Valhalla awaits. You should probably get ready. Why didn't you delete it? Hold on. Wait, what? Okay. Anyways, they're having their own conversation. All right, the court should be back in a few. We should finish this up. It is 11:25 a.m. my time. At noon my time, I'm hoping we are done. So in the next 35 minutes, because I am going on laid back news. If we're not done with this, depending on where we are, we have 2 oral arguments, right? It shouldn't be that long. It should take maybe 15 minutes each at the most. And then if the judge is taking everything under advisement or if he's going to issue an opinion, I might be late to laid back news, or depending on what the judge says, I'll come back after lunch and issue my opinion that I might stop this. I'll do a day 4 part 2 to come back for the judge's opinion. We'll just kind of wait and see how everything goes. Let's see. This is going to be brought over to laid back news. Valhalla's not on laid back news. I don't think he is. Yeah, the back and forth between Valhalla awaits, you won't chug a beer, you coward, and Valhalla awaits. It's highly entertaining. What if we get Viva to save Valhalla? That would be awesome. I would go for it. Is Viva supposed to be on? I don't even know who's supposed to be on. I hadn't even looked at the thumbnail. Let's see. Shall we see who's going to be on with me? Oh, what? These court feeds. Oh, wait. Is it going? Okay, it looks like me, Ian, is that Uncivil, Viva, and Chandler. Oh, and Southern. So that's who's going to be on. This is the feed. This is not me. I don't know what's going on with their feed. Are we doing something? Yes, I also have a Cash App too. Thank you, Wendy, for pointing that out. If you guys are so inclined to Cash App me for all this wonderful service and commentary I'm providing, feel free. YouTube does take a cut. Cash App does not. And Wendy, thank you for the Cash App yesterday. I don't know if I thanked you or not publicly, but thank you very much. Chandler Remington. Let's see. Who's all on? I see Ian. I see Kurt from Uncivil. Viva. Chandler Remington. MLS Law Show. Who's that guy? He sounds cool. And Southern Law. So that's who's going to be on today. And I'm sure Joe is going to show up at some point. Maybe not. Joe always shows up for them, though, because he has to be rambling about something when they end the stream. All the cool kids will be there. Oh, thank you. Yes, Wendy dropped a link. I should pin that. I'm going to pin that. Pin message. I don't have a afternoon stream up for this hearing because I thought for sure it was going to be over with. I'm not sure what I'm going to do. I'll probably just... you guys will just have to remember. You have to like and subscribe, become a member. Click the bell icon with the and make sure you select all notifications so that when I do go live, you get a notification of it. Yeah, I like laid back. I don't know what is going on. This is really annoying. Yeah, see, it's not the system pausing. It's not me buffering. It's actually the feed. That's really annoying. I'm going to check out a different feed while we're waiting. I was watching Fox 2 News. They're still on break, but I'm going to switch over to a different stream. Here we go. So at least it's not skipping because that was really annoying. All right. And StreamYard's still not working, so that's awesome. This is why we need our own cameras, right, Wendy? Exactly. Listen to Wendy. We need our own cameras in the courtroom so we don't have to deal with this. This, by the way, is the county in which I reside. This court is about 25 minutes when there's not construction away from my home. And yeah, so I can easily have cameras up there and someone to operate them for me and all this stuff. Oh, now this one's doing it. That's it. I'm doing my own cameras from now on. If it's in Michigan, I'm doing my own cameras. By the way, I have another Michigan case that I'm going to start covering. It is a cousin dumpster murder, where a cousin is being accused of killing the other cousin and dumping her body in a dumpster. So that case, the preliminary examination took place last week. I was thinking about covering it, and then I didn't, but I think I'm going to because it's kind of an interesting case. Oh, Luna, thank you very much. You get a little heart reply. It won't let me send text messages as replies, but I appreciate it. Thank you very much. I'm sorry, the name is funny. Remy Legal. Valhalla awaits. You won't chug a beer, you coward, with this $2 super chat. So do your own cameras or build a boat. Well, I'm doing both. I'm building a boat and I'm doing my own cameras. Now the whole feed cut out. This is stupid. This is dumb. What is going on? See, this is why we need my own cameras. Yeah, but no, I'm doing both. I can build a boat and have my own cameras in the courtroom and all of that goodness. Okay. That's 4. No, that's 2. What was I looking at? Why is it black? Oh, this is annoying. Let's try something else. Let's, oh, I don't want to go there. Did they cut the feed? I don't know what they did. Because the other feed just has the courtroom shut the cameras down right now. So they're still on break. So at least we know that much. We're not missing anything right now. Okay, we'll just hang out, I guess. So how's everybody doing? Let me make sure this volume is boosted in case when they're ready to go. All right, let me get back and check out the chat. Valhalla awaits. You won't chug a beer, you coward. Chandler with the $2 super chat. Chandler, Chandler will be your designated drinker, Valhalla. Oh, okay. Chandler, you're going to be the DD for Valhalla? That's awesome. He kind of owes you, right? Or I guess, no, you kind of owe him for the compliment he gave you yesterday on Flux. Who is the defendant in the dumpster case? The name is a good question. Let me find the name for you. Zion Foster. I'm sorry, Zion Foster is the girl that went missing. The cousin is Jalen Brazier, Brazier. So that's the defendant in this case. And the preliminary examination was last week, and it's an older case. The girl went missing for a while, and then they kind of suspected the cousin, and now they finally brought charges. So it's an interesting case. It's out of Detroit, Wayne County. So I'm going to be covering that. Twisted. I sound so disappointed. Well, because I'm just tired of these feeds. And I don't want to use L and C word. I really don't want to use L and C word. One, I don't like their feed, and two, it's L and C word. So for two reasons, I don't want to use them. Valhalla awaits. You won't chug a beer, you coward, with another $2 super chat. What on earth did Val say? I told Mrs. Valhalla she was dying laughing.
All rise.
That was loud.
Thank you. You may be seated.
Your Honor, calling People versus Ethan Crumley, case number 279506.
Everyone put their appearances on. Let's get some oral arguments going.
Thank you, Marquise, on behalf of people. Good afternoon, Your Honor. David Glenn, on behalf of people.
Hello, Michelle Lofton on behalf of the defense.
Amy Cox on behalf of Ethan Crumley.
Deborah H. McKelvey on behalf of Ethan Crumley.
Thank you. With that, you may all be seated. People prepared for a closing argument?
Yeah.
Thank you. You may proceed.
We don't know if Ethan was remorseful. I don't think that was testified to at all. This is the elected prosecutor, Karen McDonald.
Prosecutor in Oakland County. And before I get started, I want to state that I've dedicated my entire adult life to helping and advocating for kids.
Oh, God, get off your political soapbox, woman.
A family law attorney, a family law judge, and I ran for this job on a platform of fair and just prosecution. Treat kids like kids, show compassion, try to help people avoid the criminal justice system. When I took office, I reversed the prior prosecutor's decision on juvenile life without parole sentences, 26 out of 30 individuals who were serving life without parole sentences for crimes they committed when they were juveniles. Based on those decisions, many were released. I did that because I believe in the sound reasoning and policy of Miller versus Alabama, which is a United States Supreme Court decision from 2012. I believe that a juvenile's youth and their characteristics should be weighed, considered before imposing the most harshest of sentence, except the death penalty. I believe it is a rare person who can be labeled irreparably corrupt, especially when that individual.
Point of order, counselor.
I believe
get back on point.
The pattern before Miller was that the criminal justice system made no distinction between a juvenile and an adult, and that needed to change. Before Miller, if a juvenile was charged for what is considered adult behavior, they were treated as an adult. I tell you all this because I believe it's my duty and my moral obligation to be transparent about why I stand here today. Because it's the last place I thought I would.
The judge doesn't need to hear this. It's the judge. You're not talking to a jury. You're right now talking to the media, woman.
Of parents and family members that had their children murdered, shot, and terrorized. Asking this court, or any court, to sentence a 17-year-old to life without parole for a crime he committed when he was 15, it was the last place I thought I would be. And it is the last place I want to be. In her opening, defense counsel stated, a court, quote, must undertake a searching inquiry into the particular juvenile as well as the particular offense and determine whether this is truly the rare juvenile for whom life without parole is constitutionally proportionate, end quote. Historically, Your Honor, advocates and jurists, prosecutors, defense attorneys on each side have framed their position around a juvenile life without parole sentence by leaving out essential components. Those who oppose a life without parole sentence for juveniles focus only on the mitigating circumstances of the offender and only mention that, of course, the crimes were heinous. Likewise, proponents describe only the horrific acts of a crime, but for the most part, ignore the individual mitigating circumstances and the offender. You're not going to hear me do that, Your Honor. I'm the prosecutor. I'm taking this position. But I'm not going to ignore any of the facts, whether they help the defendant or help my position or they don't. And I haven't allowed any member of my team to do that since the day of that shooting.
Why are we
I've
talking?
instructed, and they have done, to look at all the facts and the data and the research and the science, and most importantly, the truth, and consider all of it.
Thank you for the $50 cash app, by the way. I won't say any names because I don't want it to get out there, but thank you. You know who you are. Thanks.
And after having done that, I'm standing here today and I'm asking you to sentence him to a life without parole sentence. United States Supreme Court Justice Sotomayor, who authored the Miller opinion in 2012, stated during the oral argument on that case, quote, "Not every juvenile is equal. Not every murder is equal," end quote. So let's review what the testimony showed us about this particular juvenile and these particular murders. Ultimately, Your Honor, your task is to answer this question. Does the evidence surrounding this defendant and these offenses, when viewed in the face of any mitigating evidence that the Miller factors may offer, justify a life without parole sentence? And I believe, Your Honor, you will conclude that it does. I know the court is well aware of the law. We're dealing here with Miller versus Alabama, a United States Supreme Court decision from 2012, then Jones v. Mississippi from 2021, and then a Michigan Supreme Court case, People versus Taylor, in 2022. And what do those cases together ask us to do? What does it require the court to do? It requires the judge to fashion a proportionate sentence. And in fashioning that sentence, the court can consider and should consider the core reasons and what makes a proportional sentence historically in this country, dating back to the 8th Amendment and the Constitution of the United States. And those are the following: deterrence, punishment, retribution, rehabilitation, and then protection of the public. In doing so, the court is required to consider the offense, the offender, the Miller factors, and anything else the court decides is relevant. It should be rare. It should be rare, Your Honor. And that's why we as prosecutors have a duty to use our discretion and follow the law. And that's what we've done here today. The first Miller factor asks the court to consider the juvenile and this crime in relation to the hallmark features of a juvenile or an adolescent brain, which involve immaturity, impetuosity, and failure to appreciate the risks and consequences. Your Honor, I argue that the evidence shows that his actions reflect the opposite of these hallmark features. There was extensive planning, and the court heard that. We heard that he put toilet paper in his ears to protect his hearing before the shooting. He researched and knew what kind of weapon he needed, and the one his parents already had for him was not going to do the job. So he advocated for a higher power firearm with more deadly bullets. He practiced. He went to the shooting range and he practiced. And if you have any question about that, look at the shooter's stance during that shooting, during that video of those awful minutes where he murdered 4 kids. He wrote about his plan over and over and over again. He searched up a map of the school on his phone. He searched that there would be no and new death penalty in Michigan. He knew which prisons a juvenile could be sent to. He knew that he would be sentenced to a life without parole. He knew the average response time of law enforcement that it takes to get to a school once a school shooting is reported. Your Honor, he also sat during those Alice trainings. He was also in those classrooms where they taught people like Heidi how to install a night lock device. He knew the damage the particular bullet of this weapon would cause on a human body. He bought, and with his mother, when he was there at the shooting range, he bought and saved rounds from that day for this shooting. And even their expert, Dr. King, stated on cross-examination, he did not believe this was an impulsive act. The implementing.
Yes,
their
Valhalla,
expert,
several life
Dr.
sentences.
Daniel
4.
King, who I have a lot of respect for, and what he's contributed to this analysis and mitigation experts, describes this phenomenon of a runaway train, where adolescents and teenagers can get into a situation and they're not equipped to stop it, and they don't know what to do. That's not what happened here. There was an execution of this plan. There were opportunities to stop. There was the picking and choosing of who would die. There was a level of comfort with the ease with the violence and pain causing to young baby birds, to young children, and a level of excitement and joy. He learned firearm discipline. He surrendered before he ever even saw the police because he wanted to live. Over and over, he stated, and the defense expert stated, he wanted a chance to be caught. Well, Your Honor, he sat in the counselor's office from 9:14 a.m. to 10:52 a.m. and never once said, I have a gun and I am going to go shoot up the school, because no one else knew he had access to a gun other than the shooter, except his two parents. But in that room,
Well, that was a
he did not say-
convoluting sentence.
He fired 32 shots, and every single shot was aiming at a human being. This was not a spray of gunfire in the hallway. It was intentionally aiming at human beings. The second Miller factor asked this court appropriately to weigh his family and home environment, for which he cannot usually extricate himself. Your Honor, the people agree that James and Jennifer Crumbly neglected their son. The people agree that the text messages he sent when he was 10 and they couldn't be bothered to come home are heartbreaking. We agree that he was isolated, that when his only friend left, his mother made it worse by saying he would never be his friend again. We agree that they did not make him a priority. We agree that it has been shocking and devastating to have your parents say to the school counselor, we don't have time to take him for help. I agree with all of that, and I have compassion. I do. But both things can be true. We can feel compassion, but we can also fashion an appropriate sentence and reckon with the
Give him the possibility of parole.
severe
Doesn't mean he's going to get it.
circumstances of this crime. We tragically have hundreds of kids every year who suffer severe physical abuse, sexual abuse, neglect. We have kids who can't count on meals or food when they get home from school, and some that don't even have a home, except we have a very, very small number of adolescents who commit mass shootings. And this factor does not predominate over any of the other evidence surrounding this offense.
It's because of his parents.
The Miller factor 3 is the circumstances of the homicide and the juvenile's role, and whether there were other actors, whether he was in situations in the past where there's been an aider and abetter, or the person who drove the getaway car. Not in this situation, he was the only actor. Miller factor 4.
He was the only actor, those words.
Youth, which affect the ability to maybe be charged with a lesser crime.
They need to
There's
come
no
back and
mitigation
hunt her.
evidence as to that factor. And then lastly, the possibility of rehabilitation. I told you at the outset, nobody has a crystal ball. And we really haven't heard much about whether or not the defendant and the shooter can be rehabilitated in such a definitive way, because it would probably be improper and unethical to say that.
Hey, Cool Frog. Thank you. Welcome to the chat. Also, so she says he acted alone, right? Then she says no one has a crystal ball. It would be unethical to try to predict what's going to happen in the future, whether or not this child could be reformed. Yet she's prosecuting parents who should have known better or predicted the actions of their son who acted alone. This very same prosecutor is going to be arguing the exact opposite thing in about 3 to 4 months. So frustrating.
And I do want to point out that this process of this Miller hearing as a prosecutor, given the case law, is imperfect.
Right, Mamasaurus Rex, exactly.
Do not have an option of having an expert evaluate the shooter in the Miller case. We don't have the benefit or the right to demand an evaluation so that we can go hire an expert that we believe is credible to opine on whether there are mitigating factors and what that means. In fact, we asked.
So half Irish, that's a good question. If you had, you should watch my evidence stream, although it's not done, it's one of a series of videos. But the one thing we talk about, which is not evidence, are the statements from the attorneys. So her arguments cannot be used in the parent's case. However, the testimony from the witnesses can be. So I think it's very telling, the statements that were made by the witnesses in this case and the questioning that was done, that can be used. But her arguments right now is not evidence, so it can't be used in any way in the parent's case.
For the defense, if we could have somebody interview and evaluate him for the purposes of whether to ask for a life without parole sentence, and they refused, which is their right, but they refused. I agree that juveniles have an increased capacity to change and grow, which indicates their actions are from transient immaturity. Here, though, there's a severe propensity and desire to commit violent and disturbing acts. And we see that by the fact that even after he was jailed in the Oakland County Jail, he used a tablet improperly and wrongfully accessed the settings on that tablet that he was provided, and visited a live gore, a reality gore website. I don't want to say the name because I don't want to give that website any more distinction. And when asked as to why he did that, he said he couldn't stop it. Taylor, the Michigan Supreme Court, does not require us as prosecutors to prove, or the court to conclude that the defendant is irreparably corrupt. Instead, taken together by the United States Supreme Court decisions and Taylor, the court has to consider many things. The first is the offender. What does the evidence show? A propensity for violence, a fascination with weapons, a self-admitted desire to, quote, do bad. He consumed mass amounts of violent content online leading up to the school shooting, which include videos of people being shot, attacked with a machete, and stabbed, of a cat being boiled alive, a child being crushed by a van. He tortured and killed baby birds and recorded himself doing so, and then relished in how disturbing his acts were. Your Honor,
that was a little disturbing video.
And I respect the fact that you did not want it to be shown here, but we needed to describe it. And if you did see the video, which I know that you did, I did as well. And the most disturbing part about it, shockingly, isn't the mutilation and torture of these tiny
Take care, rabbit.
things and drills going through their stomach and burning wings. The most disturbing part about it was the defendant's voice as he was doing it. He was playful. He exhibited pleasure from it. And it's something I will never forget. He discussed his desire to stalk, kidnap, rape, torture, and kill people on numerous occasions. For example, kidnapping, raping, torturing, killing, and dissecting another student. In a separate instance, he discussed drowning small children and how it would be, quote, the best feeling to look them in their eyes as they look back at you while they know that their entire life is about to end so young. And to, quote, stick your fingers into their eye sockets and push down so they scream in pain and drown their lungs with water, end quote. Defendant followed up by stating, whenever I see a little kid about a year old or a little more, I want to pick them up and run off with them, then torture them before throwing them off a cliff. He took pleasure in his appetite for violence, even acknowledging it was wrong by making comments such as, I love the darkness, it feels good. Knowing that you're different from society and not some mindless human like all the others. We have the ability to do stuff and that other people think is wrong, and we can tell ourselves that it's okay. He wrote, but I want to do bad. It satisfies me. He wrote, killing the innocent is the same as killing the bad. It both satisfies. And he wrote, scary thing is I like being this fucked up. I like it. I like being like this, end quote. Does a propensity for extreme violence and disturbing thoughts, actions mean he's necessarily mentally ill? As hard as it is for us to accept, we know from the testimony of a medically certified psychiatrist.
Yeah, the child said a
that it
lot of
isn't.
things, Soren. If you're really interested, you should watch the
Now, and I know you've sat
day
through a
1,
lot of
2,
really
day 1
difficult,
and 2, day 3 a little bit as well.
The defendant shot 4 kids and wounded 7. At 12:51, he came out of the bathroom and shot Phoebe Arthur, who was a freshman and 14 years old. He shot her in the neck and the collarbone. He then shot Elijah Mueller in the face. He was 14 years old at the time. He was also a freshman. At 12:51 and 14, he shot Riley Franz, who was shot in the neck area. Riley was 17 years old at the time, and she was a senior. Kylie Osage was shot next in the chest and the shoulder area. Kylie was 17 and a senior. He then shot Hannah St. Juliana, and we know that he killed her. She was shot multiple times in the left upper back, the abdomen, the thigh, and the forearm. She was 14 years old at that time, Your Honor. She was a freshman. And the thing that really I do not believe we can forget is that after shooting her, he turned back and shot her again. Because it wasn't enough that she was already on the ground bleeding. At 12:51 and 16, he shot John Asciutto in the lower extremities. He was 17 years old at the time and a senior. We teach kids to run, hide, fight. And I will never forget the time I had to show Madison Baldwin's mother the video of how she actually died. Because Madison didn't run. Her instinct was to crouch down and curl up in a ball and put her hands over her head. He shot her at point blank range. She was 17 and she was a senior. At 12:52, Tate Meir walks into the building and is shot in the back of the head. Tate was 16 at the time and he was a junior. At 12:52, Aiden Watson was shot in the lower left leg in front of his shin. And he was a sophomore. Seconds later, he turned back and he shot Tate for a second time in the lower extremity. At 12:52 and 54, he looked Molly Darnell, who was a teacher at Oxford High School, in the eyes, and he shot through the window and missed her heart by centimeters. After that, at 12:58, in the bathroom, he motioned for Justin Schilling to come out of the stall, put him down on the ground, and shot him in the back of the head. He was 17 years old. He was a senior. In his last moments, he helped another student, Keegan Gregory, who testified. You heard Keegan's testimony. You heard what it was like in that bathroom. You also heard him say that he said, please, as he was crouched on the toilet, as Justin instructed him to do. And he ran. He ran as fast as he could, and it's the only reason he's alive. These students, they didn't attack the defendant, Your Honor. They didn't go after him. They didn't even try to really protect themselves. They surrendered. They did what he told them to do, and then he executed Justin Schilling. And he only stopped because there was no one left to shoot. You saw the video. Those kids were trained to go into lockdown, and they did. At the time the defendant went into the bathroom where he found Justin and Keegan, there were no more students to shoot, and there were no more classrooms left to be unlocked. Your Honor, I asked
I was
Keegan,
muted.
and I
When did
showed
Amy
him
Poehler
pictures
become
very difficult for
DA?
him, the text messages that he sent to his family when he was in that stall. But I can't urge enough how we must not forget that the defendant is also charged and has been convicted of terrorism. Because there were hundreds of kids in that building
I don't like the terrorism charge.
who wrote and texted their parents very similar things. And parents everywhere who received those text messages from their kids saying, there's a shooter, I'm scared, I love you. Because they weren't sure they would ever see their parents again. These kids were young, Your Honor. They were the innocents that the defendant wanted to kill. They didn't fight back. They didn't pose a threat. They were helpless, like the birds. And not only did this happen in a manner in which the motivation behind the acts, which is the very
Ella, you're very
distinct
late. We're just
thing I
doing
would like
closing
to read for
arguments.
this court. These acts were carried out in cold and a calculated manner, no question. They were intended to have a devastating effect on as many people as he could.
Oh,
But they
just
were
done.
also
Thank you.
intended to derive pleasure and satisfaction from violence and nothing else.
Might have to
He
put this
stated
on
he
pause.
wanted to kill young people because they had their whole life ahead of them and they had a future. And he succeeded. He said, every night I lie awake, every passing minute, I think about how many potential people will die. Think about it, all 10. People are living their lives right now thinking about how they will get a job and party at college and have a family and live a long life. However, what they don't know is that they only have a few months to live before they enter the dark void. Yes, exclamation point. He said the first victim has to be a pretty girl with a future so she can suffer just like me. He said he liked specifically killing the young birds because the birds, but I like the killing the baby birds more, mostly because they're so young and they had a wild life ahead of them. But then I took it away, always, away. That is what I like. And also they are helpless and they can scream when you hurt them. He searched about response times in schools, different weapons, ammunition. As I stated, he knew that Michigan didn't have a death penalty and he had the map of the school. This was an extended period of planning that was reflected in the journal. Passage after passage in the journal discusses his plan to shoot up the school, including his goal, because the biggest school shooting have the biggest school shooting of this decade. His intent to kill the victims, to make the victims' families with sadness and distraught, and how he wanted all of America to see the darkness in him and hate him. He weighed the pros and cons of how he would conclude this horrific act and debated whether he would kill himself or surrender to law enforcement. Defense counsel brought up Jill Peterson, who is the author of the Violence Project. And we consulted with, and she testified in another proceeding. And I found that interesting because the one thing Jill Peterson will tell you, that in her extensive, comprehensive, thorough database of mass shooters in this country, not one of them made a plan to stay alive so that he could see the suffering of the victims' families.
Okay, folks. Sorry. Yeah, I'm gonna have to end this now and head over to Laid Back News. I will redirect you all there. I just set that up. And when I am done with Laid Back News, which should go about till 2 p.m. Eastern, I will finish this up. I was hoping to get this done and not have to take a break in the middle of it, but unfortunately I have to. So you guys will all be redirected over there. You will see me there, as well as Chandler and Chandler Remington. And let's see, Runkle is there, and Viva and Southern Law is all there. So I'll be over there in just a couple of moments. And then I don't know where he's going to redirect you all, but I'll try to get a stream up and running so that when we're done there, we'll come back to this. Yeah. So hopefully you guys follow me around today, and we'll be back for the rest of this. Otherwise, have a good day, but try to come back. This should be interesting. I want to hear what the judge has to say. Take care.